Hey, I'm Luke, and today we're talking about Towers of Midnight, Book 13 of The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson. You know, with Rand's arc mostly complete, I actually wasn't expecting Towers of Midnight to be this thrilling, but I'm really glad to say I was completely wrong there. The conclusions to Matt and Perrin's major story arcs were absolutely incredible, and the just numinous scenes of Rand following his awakening really were just a ton of fun. As always, I want to warn everyone that I'm about to thoroughly spoil this book. The Wheel of Time is a fantastic series, so if you somehow stumbled upon this video without having read Towers of Midnight, I strongly recommend that you stop watching and go read it first. It's fine if you haven't read A Memory of Light yet, I haven't either, but everything else in the series is fair for spoilers here. Please also continue to keep spoilers from later in the series, at this point just A Memory of Light, out of the comments. Next video, I promise we can at that point go all out. It'll be great, but just keep it silent until then. As you can see, I have a new office now. I'm finally moved into the new house, I'm done with the renovations. Thanks for bearing with me with that. I know there's been a longer than usual delay between videos. It was a ton of work. I was actually hoping here to have a new microphone as well. I even got a fancy new arm set up to use it. And then I realized at the last minute that with the Blue Yeti microphone, you actually have to have it plugged into a computer. My computer's right here, the fans are really loud, so today I'm just gonna keep using the normal microphone I've been using. So hopefully next time or maybe in a future video, I'll have an even better setup. But for today, I have a new office. I'm really excited about it. I hope it looks better. You probably don't even care. You can barely even see it. I'm really in the middle. But in any case, this is gonna be a long one. So let's just jump right into it. It's kind of becoming a trend that every video I say this summary is much longer than the previous one. I'm really hoping that doesn't continue into the next book because it's gonna be long this time. Frankly, I'm a little worried it's gonna be too long, but I sent it out from some early feedback and everyone that saw it actually really liked it and said it actually helped them kind of keep track of what happened in this book and in a couple of cases even kind of figure out some things that they had missed along the way. So I hope it's useful for people that want it. If you don't want a summary, that's fine. I'm really excited to be here for the analysis part of the video, the kind of the second half of it. The summary is just sort of something I do so that people can know which book we're talking about, and then because it helps me understand and kind of write the analysis if I write the summary first. So if you don't want to listen to the summary, I'll have chapters below the video. Just skip ahead to the end of the summary part and you'll skip what I'm assuming is going to be like a full hour just of summary. If you do want the summary, then great. I'll also have that subdivided into chapters per character because again, it's going to be pretty long. So if you just want to see what happened to Perrin or Matt or whoever, you can use chapters to get there. But let's get into it. So it's important to note that the timelines for each perspective in Towers of Midnight aren't synchronized at the start of the book. By paying close attention to Matt and Perrin's visions, as well as any mentions of time that anyone makes, we can anchor each perspective, but I don't actually think that it's important to get this perfectly right. What matters here is that Matt and Perrin's stories in Towers of Midnight begin well before Rand's awakening at the end of the Gathering Storm, but Egwene's perspective begins at the same time as Rand's, given that in Chapter 1 they both speak. If you feel lost, remember that Rand sets the date for the meeting on the Field of Marilor 1 month after he talks to Egwene at the beginning of the book, which is shortly after his awakening on Dragonmount. As everyone is done with their other business by then, you can count backwards to figure out when any particular event happened. I'll also point out some of the key moments that anchor the parallel perspectives to one another in the relevant sections. It's strongly implied by the snippet from The Dragon Reborn by Loyal, not by Robert Jordan, by Loyal, that Loyal's plea to the Ogier worked and convinced the Ogier not to open the Book of Translation and leave humanity to its fate. But I imagine we'll probably see more about that actual scene directly in A Memory of Light. In this book, the wind rises above Imferel, northwest of Shandar and home to the Towers of Midnight. Egwene also has a dream of 13 black towers, which much refer to the Towers of Midnight, falling one by one. One collapses but then grows the tallest. In the end, 6 remain. Still, the Towers of Midnight themselves don't actually play much of a role in this book, so I think the title is more in reference to the Tower of Genji and the darkness gathering of both the White and Black Towers. Fortifications across the borderlands fall to Shadowspawn. We see a tragic scene of the men at Heath Tower, which also shows us that the attack has been specifically orchestrated to delay news from spreading. There will be little warning when the Trolloc armies reach less defended lands. Moving on to Lan. Throughout the book, Lan makes his journey across the borderlands and arrives at Tarwin's Gap. Recall that Tarwin's Gap is where Rand burned the Trolloc armies with the Eye of the World in Book 1. Along the way, Lan continually struggles with accepting his destiny. His intent is to commit suicide by running into the Trolloc hordes unaided. Yet, due to Nynaeve's maneuvering and Lan's begrudging acceptance of duty, that it's heavier than a mountain, whereas a meaningless death would be as light as a feather, his followers gradually increase. He's first joined by Bjorn, who we last saw in New Spring as a lanky young man gawking at Lan's armor. Others, mostly Malchieri, join him along the way. Finally, in the Silverwall Keeps guarding Fershan Pass on the border between Kandor and Arafel, Mandar, Lan's horse, is recognized, and Lan gives in, declaring with a sigh that the golden crane flies for Tarmangadan. Let any man or woman who wishes to follow it join and fight. Shortly before reaching the Silverwall Keeps, Lan feels that Nynaeve has taken his bond, so finally. In the epilogue, we see Lan begin the charge into Tarwin's Gap. Nynaeve's scheme worked, and Lan travels with a force 12,000 strong, likely every remaining Malchieri man strong enough to hold a sword, but also many other Borderlanders. Yet, the Trollocs already assembled their number at least 150,000 by Lan's rough count. Reasonable tactics would recommend picking defensive positions in the fortifications at the Gap and praying the enemy didn't bring any channelers, but Lan came to ride for Malchior, so he orders the charge. Though, given that Tarwin's Gap was once part of Malchior, this... Whatever. I guess we'll see next book whether anyone intervenes to save Lan and his forces, or if he's just going to ensure that the Trollocs are well fed when the last battle begins in earnest. Moving on to the Chosen. Surprise! Grendel didn't die. It's almost as if every single time a character dies without leaving a visible corpse, we should wonder whether they're actually dead. Tom, Moraine, Shaitan, recall that Rand totally killed him in Eye of the World, Baalzamon, Lanfear, Grendel, Samael. In the prologue, we see the scene of Natron's Barrow from Grendel's perspective. When Ramshallan came in, Grendel knew that Rand was up to something and had Dallana and Arengar weave compulsion on Ramshallan to throw Rand off, not doing anything herself. Grendel used a dove to spy on Rand and saw that he had the Choden Call and was standing nearby, which is how she figured out that he was planning to destroy the palace in Balefire and used the compulsion on Ramshallan to check whether Grendel was caught in the blast. With only seconds of warning, Grendel left Arengar and Dallana to their fate so Rand would think she was dead. Grendel is called to explain herself to Moradin. She pretends that she had Rand destroy her palace intentionally to torment him with the guilt of killing innocents. Privately, Grendel wonders whether Moradin is even capable of understanding this, and she reflects on how there was a time before she became chosen when she had a conscience and would have been devastated by such an act. Moradin seems unconvinced, but Shaitan speaks directly to him now, and he grants Grendel one more chance to serve by killing Perrin, who the Prophets of the Shadow claim will be killed by the Shadow. He gives Grendel a dream spike, which we later learn is an item that can be placed in Teleron Riode to project a dome into both the dream and the waking world, preventing traveling beyond its borders. Moradin also lends Grendel the services of Isam/Luke, the man with two souls. Grendel notes throughout this scene that Moradin seems changed. Not only does Shaitan now speak to him directly even when he's not at Shia Ghul, but he also seems to crave heat, standing before large fireplaces even though it's very hot. Too hot even for Grendel to ignore it. Grendel understands that Perrin is very strongly Ta'veren, so she weaves a chaotic plan of many parts to overcome the warping of probability that comes with that. She aims to trap Perrin with the White Cloaks using the Dream Spike, presumably with Bayar supporting her plan from within. If Perrin tries to move the Dream Spike, he'll be killed by Slayer. If the White Cloaks can't finish the job, an army of Trollocs will. However, she underestimates Perrin's strength as Ta'veren, and her entire scheme serves only to force Perrin to confront his own insecurities, becoming a master of the Wolf Dream and a leader to his people, gather the White Cloaks to his cause, and inadvertently trap Missana in the White Tower, allowing Egwene to subdue her. In the end, Shadar Haran comes for Grendel to punish her for losing 3 of the Chosen without accomplishing anything. Moving on to Padan Fain. Fain is now in the Blight. He can manifest a mist that kills and seemingly reanimates his victims as zombie slaves. He has no trouble killing even the blight worms with his dagger. His madness might be even stronger than it was the last time we saw him, if that's even possible. His identity seems to continually change between Fain, Mordeth, and the other things that he's been. His mere touch is enough to kill Myrddraal. He would wear gloves to prevent this so he could torture them, but that would stop him from continually cutting his hands with his dagger. Fain goes to where he knows Rand must go, Shia Ghul presumably, so he can finally kill him. After that, he thinks he might kill the Dark One as well. Maybe he can. Moving on to Aviendha. Aviendha's perspective in Towers of Midnight is separate from everything else that happens, as she spends the book visiting Rhuidean. Along the way, she encounters a mysterious woman named Nakomi, who asks Aviendha about the Threefold Land in the Aiel. The Threefold Land is so named because of the 3 things it did to the Aiel. It punished them for sin, tested their courage, and formed an anvil to shape them. It prepared them to meet their toe for having broken the Way to Leaf by fighting in the last battle. So, once the battle is over, why would the Aiel return to the Waste? Should they continue to become strong just for the sake of being strong? Nakomi vanishes, leaving Aviendha with these questions. Aviendha reaches Rhuidean and thinks on the role of tradition and how things must sometimes change. She takes the trial and finds that it's become unnecessary, as it merely reveals what Rand already revealed to all the Aiel. She uses her talent to read Terangriel and the glass pillars and finds that they're far beyond her, but her attempt reveals new visions. She goes through the trial a second time and is given visions of the future through the eyes of her descendants. To her horror, she finds that her own line will be responsible for destroying the Aiel. Over generations of decisions that each felt sensible in the moment, they slowly lose their sense of honor and forget about the Toe and Jie. They will abandon the peace Ram will create, supporting war with the Shan. They will use underhanded means to trick the other countries into joining the war as their allies. They will forget about the purpose of the Gaishain, and they will use swords when necessary. The Aiel will be driven back to the waste, and their last remnants will scavenge for food, completely devoid of honor. Aviendha can't know whether these visions are inevitable, but she's going to try to stop them regardless. Lord Captain Commander of the Children of the Light, Galad, begins the book leading the roughly 7,000 men who joined him through swampland on the border of Galad and Ilterra, making their way towards Andor. As they break clear of the swamp, Galad finds that one of his scouts betrayed him. Asunawa is there waiting with 10,000 children who are not exhausted from having traveled through swampland. Galad understands that, while Asunawa is a villain, the men who follow him are doing so for reasons that Galad can understand, and, given what they know, could even agree with. Though Galad would have fought a losing battle if the cause was just, he cannot see righteousness in allowing so many good men to die in a meaningless conflict when only Asunawa is at fault. So, Galad negotiates terms wherein Galad's men are spared without being subject to questioning, with Galad himself going willingly into Asunawa's custody. Through it all, Galad insists that he is not a dark friend, and he braces himself for denying this charge through the coming torture. However, Galad is quickly rescued, not by his own men but by the other lord's captain, who heard the exchange between Galad and Asunawa and decided that Galad was right and should lead them. They killed about a third of the Inquisitors and beheaded Asunawa. Galad frees the prisoners and accepts the allegiance of those who support him, becoming Lord Captain Commander of all the remaining Children of the Light, not just the rebels. Bayar captures a bunch of wagons. They're the supplies that Perrin sent with Basil Gill. They discover that they're followers of Perrin Goldeneyes, who Bornhald still blames for the death of his father, and the children believe to be a dark friend who brought Torlax down on the Two Rivers just to win the loyalty of the people there by leading the defenses. It's a little weird, but that's what they believe. They decide to keep the prisoners to use against Perrin. The rest of Galad's perspective fits into Perrin and Faile's section. So, moving on to Perrin and Faile then. Perrin begins the book conflicted and anxious about his identity as both a leader and as a wolf brother. In his dreams, he's trying to forge something, but he doesn't know what, and the result is misshapen. All he knows is it's somehow 3 pieces, but he can't understand what the 3 pieces are. He's also made agonized figures for each person who's died for him, which is very similar to Rand's list. Though Perrin has thrown away his axe, he's found that killing with the hammer is no different. Perrin's perspective begins about a month after Malden. His soldiers and refugees are just reaching the Johanna Road and getting closer to Andor, but still within Galdan. The Channelers, in particular the Ashaman, were struck with a sickness caused by snakes created by a bubble of evil, which delayed the journey. Perrin's forces continue to grow as people head toward the stability and food that Perrin brings. Mercenaries are happy to join up just for the promise of a meal. As they move on, Perrin finds the blight growing along the Johanna Road. Disturbingly, the blighted plants are actually much healthier than the rest of them. In the center of the pocket of blight is an abandoned village with architecture unlike anything else in the region. Perrin orders the blighted area burn with the One Power. Both the time spent burning the blight and the difficult terrain between them and Camelin further delay Perrin's forces. Hopper meets Perrin in the wolf dream. Hopper wants to teach Perrin before the last hunt, so he invites Perrin out on a hunt with a pack of wolves. While struggling to run in the dream, Perrin has a series of prophetic dreams. A vision of Mat fighting a dozen men while a shadowy figure sneaks up on him. A vision of wolves chasing a herd of sheep towards a wood where a terrible beast hides. And a vision of Faile, Grady, Elias, Gaul, etc. walking towards a cliff followed by thousands of others. Perrin finally focuses and joins Hopper and a pack of wolves. They hunt a great 26-point stag and the wolves allow Perrin to lead. He realizes that he's slowing them down running as a man, so he runs as a wolf. As he catches the stag, Perrin gets too wrapped up in the moment and Hopper stops him from giving the stag a final death. Perrin is still confused and anxious that he'll lose himself to the wolf, just as Noam, the crazed man Perrin met in The Dragon Reborn, did. Yet, Perrin knows that he must confront this eventually, and that he must learn more of the wolf dream, so he accepts further training from Hopper. Perrin sends a few people to scout Cairhien and gather news. The Wise Ones begin training with the Ashaman to form circles so they can create larger gateways. They figure it out later on in the book. Perrin orders the remaining wolf banners burned, reasserting that he plans to send the refugees home and hand the soldiers over to Rand, as he isn't cut out to be a leader. Everyone there thinks he's being a fool. Even Mygdin, who sees Perrin as a rebel within Andor, thinks that, with the world in the state it's in, it would be better if he took command. Perrin tells Mygdin and Talonvor that they're getting married, and gives Mygdin an hour to get ready, and she properly chastises him for being so obtuse. Sulin and some other maidens return from scouting to inform Perrin that a White Cloak army is approaching from ahead of them on the road. Their scouts also discover that the supply caravan led by Gil has been taken prisoner. Note that, by this point, it starts to become clear for anyone reading both Perrin and Galad's sections that strange things keep happening to force a confrontation between them, though it's ambiguous whether this is due to Grendel's scheming or Perrin's ta'veren warping of the pattern, or both. Bornhold rides into Perrin's camp to announce that the Lord Captain Commander will receive him at a position outside the camp. Though this feels like a trap, Perrin rides out to meet him. Note that he does not take Faile with. At seeing Perrin's eyes and the look of guilt and hearing the charge of murdering 2 children of the light, Galad decides that he is in fact a dark friend and sets his terms. He will release the prisoners if Perrin's forces meet him in battle. Faile plans a date night for her and Perrin to celebrate their first anniversary, a holiday called Shanahar in Saldea. Though the Saldean tradition is for days of gift-giving and the Two Rivers has no formal version of the event, she asks Tam what he did with his wife to celebrate their marriage and plans something similar for Perrin, a private picnic outside at night. Before the meeting, Faile thinks about how her life has gone recently and finds that she's grateful for her mother's teachings and feels foolish for her rebellious behavior when she ran off to become a hunter of the Horn. During their feast, Perrin opens up to Faile, telling her about the night after Shadar Logoth when he killed the White Cloaks, how he loses himself in battle, and his anxiety that he'll lose himself to the wolf within. Finally, he tells her about Hopper. Faile tells him about Malden, though Perrin knows that she's leaving out something about the Maradon that he killed and correctly guesses that she had some positive feelings for him, but he doesn't mind. Either that she keeps her secrets or that he killed him. He was, after all, an enemy combatant who had killed Perrin's men. Most of all, Perrin is touched that Faile recognizes how much she expects him to learn her ways and is trying to learn some of his by having this simple picnic. The awkwardness between them is broken and they both feel as though things are finally right again. Perrin especially feels as though he finally has Faile back completely. That very night, asleep with Faile in the hill, Hopper begins giving Perrin lessons in manipulating the wolf dream, starting with the balance of being present in the dream strongly enough to be solid without losing himself completely. Whenever Perrin starts to forget himself, he reminds himself of home, Faile. While running and training, they discover a violet wall in the sky that Hopper hates instinctually. The wall vanishes while they're looking at it. Faile finally confronts Elayne directly about the rumor she started, via her proxies, while Faile was taken by the Shido. Faile is a little surprised to find that, for all her experience with men, Elayne really does not understand Perrin at all, or really the feelings of any of the people from the Two Rivers. Elayne seems to honestly believe that the rumors will just blow over with Perrin's people, and that Perrin himself will be a stronger leader for it. Faile tells Elayne that she has no choice. They must duel in proper Saldean tradition. It's a bluff, but it works. Faile realized that she really knew no way to resolve the situation peacefully, but if anyone could figure it out, it was Elayne. Properly motivated by fear of death, Elayne proposes that the two of them pretend to be friends when in public, which, combined with an official repudiation of the rumors, should put a stop to it. For good measure, Elayne will find some new man to harass. The scouts return from Cairhien. They learn that Elayne is the Queen of Andor and that Rand is an Ered Doman. The Aiel assert that, as the Shan-Shan have Wise Ones and prisoners, they have a year and a day to release them before the Aiel will go to war with the Shan-Shan. The Karakarn cannot demand any more from us. Maegdon overhears that Gaebril was Robin, and rumors say that he bewitched Morgase before eventually killing her. Now aware that she was used by Robin, Morgase walks to a pool outside the camp, meditating on how hateful it is to be used. In this melodramatic moment, Talonvor appears, as he's also bitter, frustrated at how long he held out hope that Morgase would finally see him, but realizing that she's still full of thoughts for Gaebril, despite everything that he did to her. He plans to go to Tyr and join the men there in the last battle. Morgase explains that she's never had someone dedicate themselves to her as completely as Talonvor has. She admits that she can't stop thinking of Gaebril, but her thoughts of him are nothing but hate. Hate for him and hate for herself and for what she let him do. Most of all, she hates that if he appeared here now, she knows that she'd do anything he asked. Morgase asks Talonvor to stay, and he agrees, as he would do anything for her. We're going to talk more about this scene later. In the wolf dream, Perrin continues to worry that he'll lose himself to the wolf, but Hopper explains that, during the hunt, only Perrin had to be stopped, implying that Perrin's single-mindedness is his own, not something from the wolves. Perrin realizes that it's possible that he isn't like the wolves because he's a wolf brother, but rather he's a wolf brother because he was like the wolves. If this is so, then he doesn't need to control the wolf, he needs to control himself. Hopper teaches Perrin more about the wolf dream. Perrin learns to teleport and manipulate the world around him. The lesson comes just in time as Slayer appears, killing Morning Light. Perrin fights with Slayer and surprises him with his new abilities, but Slayer is still much stronger and Perrin needs to flee the dream. On the day Perrin must battle the White Cloaks, the Ashaman find that they cannot make gateways within several miles of the camp. Seemingly left with no choice other than to battle the White Cloaks, Perrin realizes that, though he can kill with the hammer, there was meaning in throwing away the axe, as the hammer can be used for both creation and destruction. Note that this is the same as how the Aiel use spears, which can also be used to hunt and gather food, but they won't use swords, which can only be used for violence against humans. At the battle, Perrin has the challengers blow a trench just in front of the White Cloaks, which would have destroyed a cavalry charge if he had wanted it to. Then he has the Two Rivers men shoot volleys of arrows into the trench, further proving that he could have utterly destroyed the White Cloaks. Perrin speaks with Galad and openly states that this was never about armies, but about him, Bayar, and Bornhald. He explains that he did kill the two White Cloaks, but only in defense, as they had already killed a friend of his, Hopper. They consider having a trial to potentially avoid a battle, but no suitable judge can be found. As Galad is leaving, he sees Magden. She sheds the disguise and reveals herself as Morghese, or Galad does it for her, either way. Everyone is stunned. Alliandre and Faile feel betrayed and embarrassed. Perrin suggests Morghese as the judge, and Galad agrees. There will be a trial in 3 days. Perrin won't necessarily agree to submit to punishment, but he'll either be proven innocent, avoiding the need for a battle, or Galad will have justification to pursue him legally. Morghese goes with Galad to catch up. Also, Galad and Elayne fall in love at first sight, because of course they do. In the dream, Perrin finds that the Violet Wall is back, only it's not a wall but a dome surrounding his camp. Hopper can walk through the dome, but it's difficult, and they can't teleport through it. Slayer hunts wolves within the dome, but Perrin still isn't ready to face him. A bubble of evil hits Perrin's camp, causing their own weapons to attack them. They learn that the weapons stop when they touch dirt, but many are wounded. Perrin asks for a delay for the trial. In Galad's camp, Morghese explains to Galad that the world isn't as black and white as he would like it to be. She tells him about a time when she executed a murderer only to find years later that he was innocent as the murderer struck again. Though she had no ill intent, she did evil by killing an innocent man. She asks whether it was best for her to learn from the experience, or if she should have been punished for murder herself. Galad recognizes that this is similar to how he killed Valda for murdering Morghese, though Valda did actually rape her, so it's not quite the same, but still, he's conflicted, honestly considering that his worldview may be incorrect. Note that this is also the day when Tam is called away with Rand, so there's one of the anchoring points between the perspectives if you were looking for it. Perrin continues his training with Hopper. To prepare for Slayer, Perrin starts looking for nightmares in cities so he can enter them and dispel them. While training, Perrin sees that the wolves are all gathering around Dragonmount, where the storm is worst. Hopper explains that this is the moment that will decide whether there will be a last hunt or if the world will simply end. Perrin feels compelled to climb the mountain, fighting against the vicious storm. At the very top, he's not surprised to see Rand standing in the heart of the storm. He sees darkness converge on Rand until there's nothing left but evil. Perrin can only watch and pray as Rand is consumed. Then, when all seems lost, a sliver of light splits the darkness. The light grows and shines up to the sky until the storm vanishes. The wolves celebrate. The last hunt begins, young bull. We live. We live. Perrin cheers and celebrates with the wolves. Afterwards, the wolves head north for the last hunt, but Hopper stays with Perrin to help him train. On the day of the trial, Perrin talks with Faile. He needs to put this behind him, which means going through with the trial and facing the judgment, but he decides that he will not submit to punishment if it comes to that. He has more important responsibilities now. It's clear that the time Perrin has spent training in the dream has made Perrin more confident in the waking world as well. At the trial, Perrin speaks openly, explaining his connection to wolves and plainly admitting that nobody was really in control of what happened that night. Both sides were terrified. Bornhald and Bayar accuse Perrin, who explains that he and Joffrey were on the same side at Falm, and that Bayar always wanted to kill Perrin. Bayar even tried to convince Perrin to run from the White Cloak so he would have an excuse to run him down. In the end, Morghese rules that Perrin is guilty, but lessens the charge from murder to unlawful killing between two mercenary groups. The charge may still be death, but it could be less. Perrin agrees that he will submit to the sentence, but only after the last battle. Morghese gives the duty of selecting the punishment to Galad, who withholds his ruling for the time being. With the trial over, both the prisoners and Morghese return to Perrin's camp. Galad also returns the supplies. Morale in the camp is hurt by the ruling, but Perrin considers it a victory, as he successfully avoided a battle, which will preserve the White Cloaks so they can fight in the last battle. With the trial over, Perrin turns his attention to the trap he feels will snap shut on them, as he expects that whoever is stopping the Asha'man from creating gateways will attack soon, now that the battle has been averted. Perrin enters the Wolf Dream to deal with the Violet Dome, which he realizes is what's preventing the Asha'man from creating gateways. Oak Dancer's pack helps Perrin fight Slayer, but Slayer is still too strong, and Oak Dancer is killed. Perrin does, however, manage to grab the Dream Spike and start carrying it away. Unknown to Perrin, this is happening at the same time as Egwene's ploy to lure out Missana that we'll hear more about later. Perrin needs to get the Dream Spike away, and by chance he takes it to Tar Valon, preventing anyone there from traveling away and trapping Missana and the Black Aja. While fighting Slayer, Perrin briefly runs into Egwene, who tries to trap him but fails as Perrin has grown beyond Egwene's abilities in the dream. Egwene is shocked to find that Perrin can even stop Balefire, which is, after all, nothing but a weave in the dream. Slayer manages to shoot an arrow through Hopper and into Perrin's leg. Wounded and alone, Perrin moves the fight into a nightmare. Slayer isn't as familiar with nightmares as Perrin is, and Perrin is able to disguise himself within it. The nightmares of Tarmangaiden, and Perrin manages to destroy the dream spike and lava from Dragonmount. Seeing that Perrin has grown recently, Hopper tells him that he's found the question, but he must now seek out Boundless to find the answer. Then Hopper dies from Slayer's arrow. In anguish, Perrin flees the dream to escape Slayer, hating himself for being a coward, and running away. Perrin awakens crying, surrounded by Faile and the Wise Ones. He tells Faile that he lost an important friend for the second time, and she understands that he's talking about Hopper. Yet, the plan worked, and the gateways are already open. Unknown to Perrin, Grendel is still in the area, furious that Slayer failed her and swearing that this isn't over. Filled with a cold fury, Perrin walks through the camp silently, his followers close behind. He needs something to work on so he can think, so he takes over making horseshoes for the farrier. He's inspired to create something greater, so he starts working on whatever it is that he's been trying to figure out throughout the book. As he works, Njald channels to help heat the metal and realizes the method for creating power-wrought weapons. A circle joins him to give him the strength. As Perrin works, he thinks on his single-mindedness and the way the wolves can see the past, present, and future but remain rooted in the moment. He thinks on the choice Hopper made to sacrifice more than any human could know in defense of the light, and considers that he has a choice too. He knows what he's making now, a great hammer. He realizes that, though he didn't ask to become a leader, the choice is his, and he finds that he wants to lead. He always thought he was a simple man who wanted a simple life, but why then did he fall in love with a complicated woman? A woman who certainly wouldn't be happy living as a blacksmith's simple wife. He decides that, if someone is going to lead the people of the Two Rivers, he wants it to be him. Doing it yourself is the only way to ensure that something is done right. He completes the hammer, imprinting a leaping wolf on the side. He names it Ma Elayne, he who soars. He calls out to Will and asks him to fetch the last wolf-head banner. Then he announces to the people of his camp that, though he has failings and he's going to make mistakes, if they want him to lead, then he will accept their oaths. The camp cheers for Perrin Goldeneyes and the last battle. The wolf-head banner will stay up until the last battle has been won. That same night, Perrin readies his soldiers. He brings them near the White Cloak camp, causing some of his followers to fear that he's going to attack them. But Perrin understands that the trap is about to snap shut and it's going to catch the White Cloaks, not him. In position near the White Cloak camp, Perrin is in the ideal place to battle Grendel's Trolloc army that ambushes the White Cloaks. Galad mounts the best defense he can, but they're caught completely by surprise, and Galad is horrified to see that the light does not defend them, and the White Cloaks are no different from any other men and are wholly unprepared to battle Trollocs. Perrin intervenes, forfeiting the high ground to ride into the White Cloak camp and save Galad. Thanks to Perrin, much of the White Cloak camp is saved, and the Trollocs are defeated. In the chaos, Bayar tries to murder Perrin, but Bornhald kills Bayar, saving Perrin. While talking with Perrin, Galad sees him save a White Cloak from a pile of bodies and sees the sincere compassion and worry in Perrin's voice, which finally convinces him that Perrin is a good man. He gives Perrin his sentence: Weregild for the families of the two men he killed, and Perrin must take part in the last battle. That done, Perrin convinces Galad to swear the White Cloaks to accept Perrin as their commander for the last battle, as Rand wouldn't trust them to act independently, and Perrin can use gateways to get them to the battle in time. Perrin realizes that this confrontation with the White Cloaks is something he needed, something forced on them by his being Ta'veren. Morghese and Talonvor get married. Their vows are great, but Perrin's a bit too terse as the officiant. Granted, Morghese asks Perrin to oversee the wedding in a really backhanded way, as she still doesn't like supporting him as a rebel lord within Elayne's kingdom. Things with Elayne appear to be wholly done as well, as the Two Rivers people apologize for ever spreading false rumors, and Elayne is now preoccupied with Galad. Perrin's forces are now nearly 70,000 strong, and the way to Camelin appears to be open. Mat surprises Perrin with a caught badger and a warning of assassins. The two will talk more in Camelin. Perrin and Faile meet with Elayne, who is extremely hostile towards them. She seems to honestly consider just executing Perrin for rebellion. Perrin and Faile point out that Andor hasn't set any aid or invested in the Two Rivers infrastructure in a very long time. There are reasons other than taxes why people might want the attention of their queen. Morghese cautions Elayne, reminding her that she's dealing with a Ta'veren. They briefly consider making Perrin High Lord of the Two Rivers, beholden only to Elayne, but then Elayne manages to haggle Perrin down, granting the Two Rivers to Rand and making Perrin his steward, with rights to use Rand's tax revenue to invest in the Two Rivers. It seems ambiguous to me whether this arrangement would allow Elayne's children to claim the Two Rivers from Perrin or his children. Elayne also wants one of Perrin and Faile's children to marry into her line, but Perrin asserts that the Two Rivers isn't going to force anyone to get married for political reasons. They move on to discuss Rand's plan to destroy the seals, and Perrin says that he could help, though he doesn't reveal that he actually agrees with Rand. Perrin meets with Mat and Tom to catch up, before Mat heads off to the Tower of Genji. Perrin actually knows about the tower, but Moiraine's letter warned against taking more than 3, so he won't go with. In the Wolf Dream, Perrin finds Boundless, and learns that Boundless is actually Noam, the man who lost himself to the wolf. Perrin learns that Noam's life as a man was horrifying. He didn't lose himself to the wolf, he chose it willingly. Perrin sees that he doesn't need to fear losing himself as the choice has always been his. He projects an image of himself as both young Bull and Perrin standing beside one another with the same scent as powerfully as he can, and he expresses his gratitude to Boundless and the rest of the wolves. Moving on to Ituralde. Ituralde's forces begin the book holding a fortification along the river Arenal that defends Maradon and Saldea from the Blight. Trolloc armies have been hitting them hard. So many Trollocs are dead they're starting to clog the river and allow passage. Though Maradon is close by, the Saldeans haven't sent any reinforcements as they consider Ituralde's forces to be invaders. The Shadowspawn use trebuchet to launch bloated corpses and hidden Drakkar into the fortification, causing severe damage. Ituralde is being pressed hard. Also, seriously, I try not to add too much commentary into the summary part here, but the scene with Ituralde screaming himself hoarse while cutting down Drakkar was just really badass. I have to imagine that we're going to have even bigger battles in the Memory of Light, but Ituralde's scenes in Towers of Midnight are really good. Ituralde's forces are eventually pushed back from the hill. He makes a slow, careful retreat that probably would have worked, except that one of the men gives into despair and charges ahead of the line, opening a gap. Ituralde rides in to plug the gap, but then one of the trumpeters signals an early retreat, which throws the line into absolute chaos. Just when it seems that all is lost, a force of Saldeans from Maradon, led by Nammain Iorli, rushes out to save them. Inside Maradon, Iorli has the rightful commander of the city, Vram Torquemund, a distant cousin of the queen, confined to his room, and Iorli's men carry a triangular black and yellow pendant that the Saldeans in the city refer to as the traitor's banner. Iorli expects to be executed for treason when this is done. In fact, he plans on demanding it to preserve his honor. Ituralde sees through Vram immediately. No Saldean would allow others to die to Trollocs just outside their walls without helping, so Vram is clearly a dark friend. Ituralde assures Iorli that when Tenobia returns, she'll see the truth of things and commend Iorli for his decision, assuming they all survive. Other than soldiers, Maradon is already evacuated, and Ituralde means to retreat further south, abandoning the city, but he sees that Iorli will not leave his post, and Ituralde cannot abandon a man who risks so much to rescue him and his forces. They will make their stand in Maradon. Men channeling among the Trolloc armies attack the walls of the city, blasting a hole large enough for Trollocs to pour through. Ituralde is wounded, only able to stay in the fight due to an unhealthy weave that allows him to ignore his fatigue. The men's version of this is more effective, but also more dangerous than the women's version, which might be the most stereotypical difference between Sided and Sidear we've seen so far. Ituralde turns the city into a giant trap for the Trollocs, hiding archers in buildings made to look as though they're destroyed and empty, and using debris to channel the Trollocs into kill zones. Fighting through the streets, sacrificing buildings as they go, Ituralde makes a heroic defense, forcing the Trollocs and Vidral to pay dearly for every gain, but they all know that the battle is a losing one. The only distant hope is that Ram will send help. Just when all seems truly lost, Bashir's forces arrive in the city, saving the last of Ituralde's men. Ituralde himself survived, but Iorli fell defending in the city. Though the surviving men are saved, they see that a new army of Trollocs, many times larger than what they've already fought, is approaching. After everything they did, the city will still be lost. Rand, now awakened, apologizes to Ituralde for leaving him stranded, and turns his wrath on the approaching armies. He travels out to meet the army with only a few maidens for protection. There, Rand enacts a display of powder we haven't seen since the Eye of the World, single-handedly destroying tens of thousands of Trollocs in a storm of fire, earth, ice, and wind that lasts about an hour. Vram Torquemund and his wife are driven mad by the storm of light. The lady throws herself from the window, and Vram puts out his eyes. It killed me. That light killed me. That done, Rand's forces travel to Tyr to find healing for the wounded soldiers and rest for Rand, exhausted by the attack. He explains that he shouldn't have done that as it came too close to a direct confrontation with Shaitan, which must only happen at the proper time and place, but he just couldn't let Shaitan take anything more from those people. Min tells Ram what she's learned of Kalendor. She fears that using it will make him weak, open to attack. He's willing to accept that perhaps this is how he'll die, but Min asserts that she's going to ensure that he lives. Rand comments that perhaps the pattern bends around Min, not him. Though Ituralde is exhausted, Rand tapes him to seek Kedsuan, who has the king of Air Doman with her. He was never captured by Grendel, he was just waylaid by Snow. Ituralde weeps with joy at seeing that his king is safe. So moving on to Rand and jumping back to the beginning of the book, not going forward from that bit with Ituralde. Rand walks down from Dragonmount awakened to his life as Lews Therin and complete as an individual. His personality is no longer split between Rand and Lews Therin. He is both people with the full memories of both, more himself now as Rand al'Thor than in any previous life, and awakened to the reality of reincarnation. The dark aura is gone, replaced by an aura of light. He is now truly he who comes with the dawn, as the sun now shines for him alone. I won't mention it in every section, but everywhere he goes, the clouds break and sunlight shines down in a perfect unnatural circle, so this is very literal. The sun also shines on Elayne, who bears his children, illuminating Caemlyn. Rand's presence wards off Shaitan's evil, returning the flavor to food and reversing some of the damage caused by spoilage. His eyes and controlled expression look like they have an Aes Sedai, which is only natural as Rand is now the only male Aes Sedai not lost to the Shadow. Rand visits the White Tower, seemingly unafraid of walking alone among so many Aes Sedai. Everyone in attendance is struck by his presence, unable to interfere, except for Egwene, who still sees him, at least in part, as Rand al'Thor, rather than the Dragon Reborn. Egwene wants to have him examined for signs of madness, but Rand politely refuses, as he doesn't have the time. Rand tells Egwene of his plans. In 1 month, he will travel to Shia Ghul and he will destroy the remaining seals in Shaitan's prison. He explains that the last time he sealed Shaitan, he did so without the help of any women, and he believes that both Saidar and Saidin will be needed. Rand requests a great meeting in the Field of Merlord just before traveling to Shia Ghul. There, he will deliver his terms to the monarchs of the world. Based on Aviendha's visions of the future, it seems that this is probably going to be the dragon's peace, but Egwene has no idea what he's talking about here. She's focused solely on stopping him from destroying the seals. To be fair, her title literally starts with Watcher of the Seals, so kind of makes sense she has an opinion on this. Rand then returns to Tyr. Min already has some idea of what's happened to Rand from the Bond. Alanna recently vanished, along with her belongings, leaving an envelope with a seal, possibly from Varen. Ketsuan fears that Alanna has been taken by the Shadow to use against Rand, though Rand's position is hardly a secret now that the sky opens above him wherever he goes. At seeing Rand, Min notes the change in his eyes, as though he's aged considerably, and she fears that the Rand she fell in love with is gone. Rand assures her that Lews Therin was always a part of him, and he's more himself now as Rand than he ever was in a previous life. He has hundreds of years of memories that he didn't have when they met, but he's still the same man Min knows. The greatest difference between Rand and Lews Therin is that Rand was raised better. She feels through the Bond that this is so. Rand asks Min to focus her research on the role Kalandor will play, as Rand has become convinced that it will be critical somehow. Rand goes about fixing things with the people he's wronged. He meets the Aiel and admits that he has tow, and things will be different now. To start, he'll stop running off without giving the maidens opportunity to guard him, which we saw in Ituralde's section, where he actually did allow the maidens to come with him. He admits to Nynaeve that he's been a fool and promises that he'll support Lan when the time comes. He pardons Ketsuan and apologizes to her. He spreads word that Egwene is the Amerlin's seat. Rand summons the High Lords and Ladies and looks each in the eye. Weramon and Analia cannot meet his gaze. It seems that Dark Friends can no longer hide from Rand. He doesn't execute them, he simply tells them to leave and to deliver the message that hiding from him is no longer possible. Finally, Rand meets with Tam and apologizes, weeping openly. With that taken care of, Rand finally introduces Min to his father. A bubble of evil petrifies a large area of Tyr, which turns to dust at the lightest touch. Nynaeve and Nynaeve, a half-mad Ashaman who sees Myrddraal in every shadow, channel wind to search for survivors in the dust, but find none. Nynaeve feels a profound frustration and sadness at seeing so much wrong with the world that she cannot heal. In this moment, she delves Nynaeve and learns to sense his madness in his mind, similar to compulsion. She successfully heals him of his madness without harming him. Moments later, Rand arrives and explains his plan to destroy the seals and confront Shaitan. Soon, to prevent any more tragedies like this. Nynaeve believes him. She delves Rand for madness and finds that his mind is completely covered in it, but it's also covered in light. The light seems to combat the darkness in his mind. It's far too much for her to heal, yet when she explains this to him, he's just ecstatic that she's discovered a way to heal madness at all. This will be a great help to the other Ashaman. Nynaeve tells Rand that she's going to take the oaths in the trial to be raised as Aes Sedai, and Rand tells her not to let the Aes Sedai ruin her. Like the other Aes Sedai of this age, Nynaeve believes that to be Aes Sedai is to be calm, but Rand asserts that to be Aes Sedai is to be what you decide it is. The best Aes Sedai I've known are the ones who others complain aren't what an Aes Sedai should be. Rand and Min return to Bandar Aban. Min has a new vision of Rand, surrounded by sunlight with a brilliant white sword in hand, wielded against one of black, held by a faceless darkness. The crops are healthy, and the dragon's Fain has become a symbol of victory and hope. Looking around, she sees visions above the heads of everyone in Bandar Aban. Though they are starving, frustrated, and sick, her visions are of Glory One fighting in the last battle. A beggar approaches Rand. In a scene like something from a myth, Rand sets about appointing roles for the beggars, who quickly regain a sense of duty and dignity and start restoring order to the city. Rand goes to the docks, where the dockmaster has been keeping the poisoned food away from the desperate people. Rand explains to him that only the open bags of food are spoiled. Every unopened bag is full of good food. In only a day, Bandar Aban is set right and its people are mobilized to fight in the last battle. Rand appoints the dockmaster, Ituralde, to the merchant council and names him steward of the city, and the first beggar that approached, Durnham, is made commander. Rand has a conversation with Min in which he expresses his fear that she sees only a murderer with hands around her neck when she looks at him, and she assures him that this isn't the case. He tells her that she's the most important of his supporters and she could be a queen if she wished it. This seems a minor scene, but I think it illustrates how, though Rand has changed, he still has insecurities and needs support. The difference is that now, when he needs reassuring, he just asks for it, and then it works out. Much later in the book, Rand notes that he needs to do something about the Black Tower, but he can't risk going there himself at the moment. He sends Nynaeve to infiltrate. Rand goes to Far Madding to meet with the Borderland leaders. He asks Cadsuan to prepare a gateway, and she tries to pretend that she can't, but Rand recognizes most of the triangle she wears. Rand also confronts her about continuing to call him boy, given that he's well over 400 years old now, decades older than her. In Far Madding, the rulers each strike him, hard enough to draw blood. Then Pytar asks Rand how Telendal Terasso died. Rand is shocked that they know the name, as that's a person he killed while battling Demandred as Luce Theron. Pytar reveals that there was a foretelling in his family about the Dragon Reborn. They would bloody him and note his restraint. They would ask him about Telendal Terasso and he would recognize the name. If not, then Pytar would kill him to prevent the Dragon Reborn from giving into the shadow. Rand notes with horror that if he had met with him before his awakening, then he wouldn't have recognized the name and he would have met their blows with Balefire. Cadsuan notes that he couldn't use Balefire in Range of the Guardian, and Rand cryptically hints that he would have had access to a power different from the One Power, referring to how he channeled Shaitan, but Cadsuan doesn't necessarily know what this means. But it worked out, and the foretelling also states that he will break what he must break, so we have a little bit of evidence there that he's going to break the seals, regardless of what Egwene does. The Borderland monarchs accept Rand as the Dragon Reborn. Rand also sends for Hurin so that he can apologize to him directly, and tells the Borderlanders that they must swear to him if they want him to take their armies to the last battle. The day before traveling to the field of Marilor, Rand thinks on how he's going to break the seals regardless of what Egwene says or does. They're not the point of the meeting. He plans to give his terms for him going to fight the last battle. At the very end of the book, in his dreams, his personal dreams, not Teleron Riod, Rand sees Merin, Lanfear, held by the shadow and begging for help. Moving on to Egwene. Egwene dreams of a great crystal sphere, sparkling the light but held together by ropes. Rand walks up to it and chops the ropes, letting the globe fall to pieces. After Rand's visit to the White Tower, which I described in Rand's section, Egwene sees that this is a dream of Rand breaking the remaining seals on Shaitan's prison. She immediately begins conspiring to stop Rand by gathering forces who agree with her for the meeting at the field of Marilor. It would seem that Egwene is prepared to stop Rand by force if necessary. Egwene also has a dream of a snake eating oblivious fledglings, which she takes as evidence that Missana is still in the tower and is still preying upon the Aes Sedai, even though the Aes Sedai aren't oblivious to Missana or the Black Aja, so this interpretation seems kind of dumb, but Egwene isn't the first Amyrlin to just decide that she knows what a proper interpretation is for a prophecy without really thinking it all the way through. 4 Aes Sedai have been murdered already. Gawyn has taken it upon himself to protect Egwene and investigate the murders. He makes peace with Chubane, the head of the Tower Guard, by admitting that he's only doing this so that he become Egwene's warder, which is true. He's not trying to usurp Chubane's position. They find evidence that a door was forced, and Gawyn believes that the assassin is not a channeler, despite Egwene's insistence that it's Missana or the Black Aja. Gawyn's interference is frustrating for Egwene, as he isn't obeying her commands and doesn't truly see her as the Amyrlin. She orders him to stop watching her door so she can lure Missana out in the open, and because she has trouble sleeping knowing that he's just a few feet away. Gawyn notes that the murdered Aes Sedai didn't have warders and recommends that Egwene mandate that the Aes Sedai take more warders to keep themselves safe. He actually makes a pretty good case for this. Egwene asserts that the decision to take a warder is an intimate one, and Gawyn reminds her that the decision, or lack thereof, to go to war is pretty intimate too, and each dead Aes Sedai now will mean greater casualties during the last battle. Of course, Egwene's not going to mandate it, but she really doesn't have this authority, but she is going to encourage it. Following Rand's visit, multiple stores of unspoiled grain are found in Tar Valon. Egwene meets with the Wise Ones to recruit them to her effort to stop Rand from destroying the seals. She's surprised to find that they have a new respect for Rand following his awakening, but they are concerned when they hear that he plans to destroy the seals. It's ambiguous whether they will side with Rand or Egwene on this. Egwene also starts laying the foundation for her plan to build an alliance between Tar Valon, the Wise Ones, and the Windfinders. Nynaeve has been avoiding Egwene for some time now, but finally responds to her summons in Teleron Riod. Egwene asserts that if even her friends cannot respect her as Amyrlin, then the other Aes Sedai won't either. Empathizing with Egwene for being in a similar situation to when Nynaeve was made wisdom, Nynaeve acquiesces, supporting Egwene. Egwene tells Nynaeve and Elayne that they must take the 3 oaths, but Elayne wants to delay this until after she gives birth, as she's worried what it might do to the unborn children. Egwene feels that, like herself, they should be exempt from the trial, but Nynaeve is determined to take it and already knows all the weaves. While talking to Nynaeve and Elayne, Egwene's wards are tripped and she finds Talva of the Black Aja captured. Elvierne appears as well, but Egwene easily outmaneuvers her, though Talva is killed in the crossfire. Elvierne escapes and Egwene chastises herself for trying to capture her with channeling rather than using her powers as a dreamer, which are much faster. Egwene discusses Missana with Saren, Yukiti, and Sain. From what they've learned, it seems that Missana is essentially the Shadow's Amyrlin, an administrator who hates being relegated to that position. Egwene plans to use herself as bait to capture Missana. Nynaeve returns to the tower to be tested. She's surprised to find that the Yellow Aja has been treating her well and seemed to be looking forward to accepting her once she's properly raised. Everyone in attendance for Nynaeve's trial is a sitter. Nynaeve's test is unusually brutal, repeatedly forcing her to abandon sick and dying children and forcing her into far more challenging situations than anyone present has ever seen before. There doesn't seem to be any conspiracy, it's just common Aes Sedai jealousy turned to cruelty. During the trial, Nynaeve eventually makes the decision that, even though she understands that breaking her composure by running or channeling before reaching the next star will mean not becoming Aes Sedai, allowing people to suffer and die for selfish gain isn't something she's willing to do. She starts breaking the rules to save more people. In the last test, she's meant to abandon land to Darkhounds, but instead she weaves balefire to destroy them and manages to pull land through, finally exiting the ter'angreal. Everyone involved is exhausted, and Nynaeve is severely wounded. Even her braid is mostly burned off, so presumably for the whole rest of the series, there's not gonna be enough time to regrow that for the last book, so from now on, Nynaeve doesn't really have much of a braid. Though Nynaeve technically failed the trial, the decision is complicated by the fact that Nynaeve should have been prevented from breaking those rules by the ter'angreal itself. Egwene explains that the experience really proves that Nynaeve was already beyond the trial. Her experience in Teleron Rio had prepared her for the dreamlike test too well, and she was able to retain too much control over it. They narrowly decide to raise Nynaeve. In a way, Nynaeve is grateful for the test with Lan, as it taught her that, although she's come to truly want to be Aes Sedai, it doesn't define her. Not as much as her love for Lan, or unwillingness to abandon him, or her ability to channel. That night, when she's supposed to be in quiet contemplation, Nynaeve travels to Morel and demands Lan's bond. Morel initially pushes back, but then Nynaeve threatens her. She's not bound by the oath yet, after all, and Morel caves. Nynaeve finally has Lan's bond. Gawyn is frustrated that Egwene doesn't seem to want his protection, even though he's certain that she needs him. He talks to Brynn, who tells him that, much like Morghese, Gawyn is often dominated by his passions, which can be a good thing when his instincts are correct, which is most of the time, but once in a while he really should try actually thinking. If I have advice for you, it's this. Find out who you would be without Egwene, and then figure out how to fit her into that. Gawyn responds by going straight to Egwene's door, even though she just told him not to, but in his defense, he actually does find an extremely fast and strong assassin who can hide in shadows and is hard to look at directly. We know that this must be a Shan-Shan blood knife, but all Gawyn knows is that, although this isn't a normal assassin, they shouldn't seem like Black Aja. Having narrowly survived the attack, he rushes into Egwene's room to check on her, and is caught in her wards, which Egwene had set up specifically to capture the murderer. Egwene and Gawyn have an argument, and Gawyn leaves for Caemlyn, which sounds really sulky, but he also really has been putting off visiting Elayne for far too long. He was, after all, raised specifically to be her first Prince of the Sword, and those duties are currently being covered by Brigitte, so probably good that he goes and visits her. The Hall meets in secret in an attempt to curtail Egwene's power to conduct war against the Shadow, but she learns of it in time to join. Egwene manipulates the Hall into taking responsibility for managing the armies, which is mostly just a drain on her time at this point, allowing Egwene's sole authority to deal with monarchs, which would include Rand. Egwene takes this moment to propose a new law stating that the Hall can no longer have these rushed secret meetings. Each sitter must have a chance to either attend or send a proxy, and the Amyrlin must be informed with enough time to attend if she wishes. The proposal passes. Egwene continues to gather monarchs to her side. She's also notified that Gawyn left for Caemlyn, and she sends a message asking him to return, though she lets Sylviana write it, not considering that she was probably going to write it really rudely, which is just what happens. Along with the message, she also sends Nicola and Nissa to collect the dream triangle that Elayne was making. Egwene's scheme to catch Missana is to spread rumors that she's going to hold a big, important meeting in Teleron Rio, which should draw Missana out. Gawyn meets with Elayne and Caemlyn, and they talk. Elayne tells Gawyn that Rand really didn't kill Morghese, and that he's also the father of her children. Elayne finally gets Gawyn to confront the fact that he only hates Rand because he's jealous. Just a couple of years ago, Gawyn was an important person and Rand was just a sheep herder, but now Rand is the Dragon Reborn and Gawyn is kind of stuck in a rut. Gawyn will probably never like Rand, but he finally lets go of his hate for him. By chance, a former Damane notices that Gawyn has a blood knife on him, and she explains what the blood knives are. Gawyn receives Egwene's message, rudely telling him to return, and he stubbornly refuses to go, but he does send back what he's learned about the blood knives. Egwene enacts her plan to catch Missana. She has Nynaeve and several Aes Sedai hold a fake meeting in Teleron Rio to lure out Missana, while Egwene meets with the Wise Ones and Windfinders elsewhere. Egwene proposes that they form an alliance, exchanging apprentices with one another to share knowledge and culture. The Windfinders and Wise Ones are wary of Tarvalon trying to bind them, but see the wisdom in Egwene's suggestion. The age is ending and times must change with it. It seems they will likely accept Egwene's proposal, sending a couple of apprentices to train with the tower for a period of time, taking them back for at least a year to share what they learned, and then allowing them to go back if they choose to. This way they can share their unique strengths, the leadership of the Wise Ones and the unique weaves of the Windfinders and the Aes Sedai. The real meeting with the Wise Ones, and when fighters complete, Siuan arrives, frazzled and singed, to tell Egwene that the Black Gotcha's attack began almost immediately. The Wise Ones stay to help fight. Battling through the tower, Egwene briefly runs into Perrin. Being Egwene, she tries to tie Perrin up and is shocked to find that Perrin easily sheds the ropes. Moreover, Perrin is able to block balefire from the Black Gotcha easily, as thoughts are more powerful than weaves in the dream. This lesson in hand, Egwene confronts Missana. Though Missana is powerful, Egwene feels as though Missana is not merely challenging Egwene, the woman, but the Amaryllis seed itself and the thousands of years that it stood. Missana's mind shatters itself against Egwene, leaving Missana in a permanent childlike stupor. Unknown to Egwene, the plan only worked because Missana was trapped by the dream spike that Perrin brought. Seeing that Egwene broke one of the Forsaken, the Wise Ones note that she is no longer a child or apprentice. While Egwene was enacting her plan, Gawyn tried to speak with Elayne, still conflicted about Egwene, but gradually coming to accept that he can live a fulfilling life depending on an important person's life without being an important person himself, and Brigitte let it slip that the women were having a meeting in Teleron Riode. Gawyn realized this would leave Egwene vulnerable and the Blood Knives would strike, so he rushed back to Tar Valon, arriving just in time to save Egwene. Gawyn manages to defeat a room full of Blood Knives by putting out the candles, leveling the playing field by negating their invisibility, which, if you've read like any of the Drizzt books, that happens like every other book, but I imagine that's really cool if you've never seen it before. Still, Gawyn is left severely wounded. When Egwene awakens, she finds that she's only alive because of Gawyn and he's on the verge of death. She swears to Gawyn that she loves him and wants him as both a warder and as a husband, then bonds him. Gawyn secretly slips the 3 rings the Blood Knives wore into his pocket. Egwene and Gawyn travel to the Field of Marilor and wait to confront Rand about breaking the seals. Egwene is certain that Rand knows on some level that he shouldn't break them. Moving on to Mat and Elayne. Mat begins the book stuck in Caemlyn, as he's unwilling to open Varen's letter or break his promise to her. The Band of the Red Hand is whole once more, as Mat's group caught up with Estienne and the others that had gone to Andor. The band is camped a league out of the city on unused land, which is the rule for all mercenary bands in the area. Mat has tried to contact Elayne to set up a meeting to discuss production of the dragons, but he hasn't yet received any response. Stuck waiting until his promise to Varen is satisfied so we can leave Caemlyn and help Tom rescue Moiraine from the Tower of Genji, Mat spends his time drinking and dicing, until he hears a rumor that a murdered body was found drained of blood, indicating the Golem is in Caemlyn, which sets the dice tumbling in his head. While saying farewell to the Aes Sedai, the Golem attacks. With the Foxhead Medallion and Tesselin's help, Mat's able to drive it off, but not before it murders 4 Red Arms and Mat's servant, Lopin. Oliver was only spared because he wasn't in Mat's tent during the attack. Mat understands the Golem only left because it must have orders not to draw too much attention, as it seems capable of simply killing the entire band if it wanted to. The day after the Golem attack, the Aes Sedai, Julian, Thera, Leolwyn, and Doman leave for Tar Valon. Mat loans them some horses and soldiers to get there safely. Setail still intends to find her husband in Ilion. Mat will ensure that she gets a gateway to Ilion in exchange for Setail watching over Oliver while Mat deals with the Golem in the Tower of Genji. Ilorian has formally asked Elayne to release her political prisoners, which is frustrating as Elayne had already intended to release them, putting them in her debt, but if she releases them now, then they're going to feel indebted to Ilorian instead. Nori's information shows that Duhara has been meeting with Ilorian, and wanted to be caught, likely as a threat due to Elaine's refusal to meet with her. Elayne schemes to both solidify her hold on Andor and claim Cairhien. Elayne discovers that Mat has been in the area for a while now, but his letters were blocked by Nori, who thought Mat was lying about knowing her. Mat and Tom meet with Elayne. Mat's surprised to find that Elayne is actually less condescending towards him now that she's queen. She greets both Mat and Tom warmly. Mat asks Elayne for the resources necessary to start constructing the dragons, which Elayne initially balks at, but when he explains what they can do, Brigitte immediately understands that dragons will fundamentally change how war is fought. Mat doesn't really seem to understand the situation he's in here. Of course, Elayne is going to be more than happy to begin production, but she's not going to build them for Rand or for Mat or for anyone else. She's going to build them for Andor and then just kind of use them, for the last battle. Elayne also tries to make the band an officially commissioned part of Andor's military, but Mat refuses. They haggle and eventually land on an arrangement. Andor will own the dragons, but only the band can use them. If the band leaves, they keep a quarter of the dragons. The band can leave whenever they want, but members must be given the option to join Caemlyn instead. As a sweetener, Elayne will find Mat a new servant, and Mat will loan the Foxhead Medallion to Elayne for 3 days to study. For some strange reason, Elayne just explicitly tells Mat that if he agreed to the commission, then she might have made him attack the 2 rivers, which I don't know why she would tell him that, but she did. Elayne meets with Elise and Sumiko to discuss the future of the kin. Some will return to the tower, but Elayne is prepared to let any who wish to stay in Caemlyn do so. In exchange, they will serve to Andor by working a free clinic, which will triage in order of severity with no regard for title. The kin would also provide gateways and be paid half for anything charged. Elayne urges allowing the kin to marry as an additional incentive and as an additional tie to the world. Privately, Elayne hopes that the kin will help Andor hold against the Shan-Shan after the last battle. She's also considering an arrangement with the Black Tower to secure channelers unfettered by the oaths to match the Damane. Mat is frustrated to find that rumors about him are alive in taverns throughout the city, and most of them are exaggerated at least a little bit, though not by that much. Noel commiserates with the headache of being known in every tavern, which he understands personally because he totally heard it from Jane Charon, who's a totally different person. Mat, Tom, and Noel prepare to rescue Moraine. Mat will bring the fire to blind in the form of fireworks. Tom will bring the music to dazzle with his instruments, and Noel will bring the iron to bind in iron throwing knives and short swords. Mat saves a man from footpads in the street, but when the man sees his face, he tries to kill him, obviously recognizes him from one of the Dark Friend pictures. Remembering that Brigida has encountered the Aelfin and Eilfin, Mat gets himself caught by the guards to lure out Brigida and ask her how to beat them. Brigida tells him her story with the Aelfin and Eilfin. Gaito was tragically injured, so she took him to the Tower of Genje to be healed. She prepared just as Mat's group is preparing, and she managed to find her way into the tower, which is really a nexus of portals. She explains that they feed off emotions of humanity, with a particular taste for Aes Sedai. If Mat can reach the Chamber of Bonds, then he can make a deal with them. Mat asks how she escaped, and she says that after 2 months of wandering, she and Gaito died there, leaving nothing but the story behind. Suddenly, Brigida feels a jolt of anger, fury, and pain from Elayne, and the two rush to her aid. While Mat and Brigida were talking, Elayne was sitting, bored, watching a play, which she only attended as part of her strategy to handle Elorian. Elayne has been attempting to copy Mat's Foxhead Tarangro with limited success. She has created a couple of copies that stop weaker weaves, but it also prevents the holder from channeling. After the play, Elayne has a spark of inspiration on how to interrogate the captured Black Aja. She uses the Mirror of Mist to disguise herself intimidatingly, like one of the Forsaken might when speaking to her lesser, and she travels into Chesmel's cell to question her as one of the Chosen. The plan works, and she learns that Chesmel has been in recent contact with other Dark Friends. Chesmel also lets it slip that the Shadow wanted Mat and Perrin dead desperately, and that they know that Mat is in the city. Just then, Sylvace's secretary walks in with Tamael and Eldrith at his side. Eldrith sees through Elayne's disguise. Foxhead in hand, Elayne is able to subdue them, but then Doilan Mellor appears. He stabs Elayne and takes the Foxhead and one of the copies. Elayne manages to kill Chesmel and chase off Mellor, retrieving the Foxhead in the process, but Doilan kills Eldrith and Tamael before escaping. Brigida and Mat arrive in time to get Elaine's help, but not soon enough to catch Doilan, who also freed Millie Skane, Marilyn, and Phalion. Fain, Elaine's midwife, orders Elayne to bed rest for her wounds. Elayne has her bed carried out to the first demonstration of the dragons. Though Eludra is still working to train the band in their aim, the dragon works as expected. Elayne is thrilled, seeing that the dragons may be as effective as Damane. Brigida is worried, recognizing that this invention will change the world, and it's likely only the beginning. Mat finally needs to deal with the Golem. He plans with Elayne and the band to lure it out and throw it into a gateway where it will fall forever. The fight is brutal, but the plan works perfectly. Mat is finally free of the Golem. After a wedding to Talonvor, Morghese visits Elayne with Galad. They catch up and decide that Elayne will grant Morghese a position of some importance, but one that takes her away from Caemlyn so she doesn't overshadow Elaine's rule. As described in Perrin's section, Elayne meets with Perrin and makes him steward of the two rivers. Elayne makes her move on Cairhien from Caemlyn. She carefully times an event to display the power of the dragons to some of Cairhien's nobility, in particular the most influential among them who supported Rand publicly but not privately, and arranges for them to walk in just as she's passing her sentence on her political prisoners. She strips Sarand, Marn, and Aran of their titles and estates, which is an extremely brutal sentence, even worse for those houses than execution, and all but ensuring that the heads are going to commit suicide as soon as possible. Recall that Rand did this to Colvir as an attempt at mercy and it backfired. However, rather than seizing their estates for herself, which would be tyrannical, Elayne proposes granting the estates to Cairhien and nobles, which would be very strange if they were foreigners, but less so if the two kingdoms were unified. This also sets up Lorstrom and Bertome as Cairhien and nobles with holdings in both countries to make their own play for the crown of the unified kingdom, which encourages them to support Elayne now. It's a dangerous play, but it works, winning Elayne their enthusiastic support, and she expects that they'll wait about a decade for the unification to kind of settle before making any open move against her, giving her plenty of time to solidify her gains. She'll also grant her political prisoners land in Cairhien, having the crown assume their debt and showing them mercy, but also further unifying the countries. Morghese praises the scheme, while Dylan fears that Elayne might be being a little too reckless. Elayne goes to Cairhien to take the throne. Brigida saves her from a poison needle in the throne itself, but Elayne does successfully claim the throne. She quickly mobilizes the people to prepare them to travel to the Field of Marilor to meet the Dragon Reborn. Mat, Tom, and Noel go to the Tower of Genje. They use a bronze knife to draw the inverted triangle with a wavy line through it, which is how you begin a game of snakes and foxes, on the tower wall, which opens into a doorway. Inside, the towers is as alien as we saw before, with onyx walls and white mist, strange angles, an alien landscape outside the windows, and passageways that don't make any sense. They find that leaving a room and then returning to it doesn't always lead back to the same room as before. After what really felt like too long, Mat realizes that he can use his dice to choose a direction, which allows them to find their way. Then the Eilfin confront them. As they didn't use the Twisted Door Triangle, they are not protected by the bargain, so the Eilfin attack. Tom's music buys them some time, as do the fireworks and the iron they brought, but they're hard-pressed. They start stealing Mat's dice, so he resorts to just closing his eyes and spinning around and pointing his Ashandre the way, which actually works. They eventually find Moraine, suspended and unconscious, wearing only a powerful angril on one wrist. Mat makes a deal to take Moraine and leave without interference from the Eilfin. He already knows the price, half the light of the world. The Eilfin take one of his eyes and pass out from the ecstasy of consuming fate itself. Mat's group leaves, thinking that they've won, until Noel realizes that Mat didn't include the Eilfin in the deal. The Eilfin come at them, and Noel sacrifices himself to buy them time, finally revealing that, surprise, he's actually Jane Farstrider, which really only surprises Mat. They finally find the way out, but the triangle is gone, so they're trapped. Mat can't remember how he got out last time, but he realizes that his Ashandre wasn't anything that he had wished for, unless it's also the way out. He uses it to carve a doorway in the wall and they escape. Moraine wakes up and reveals that the Eilfin and Eilfin consume much of her ability to channel, leaving her weak, similar to what we saw with Lanfear before. But the angril she carries is so powerful that, with it, she's stronger than she was before. They catch up for just a short bit, and then Moraine proposes to Tom, who also agrees to be her warder. Mat notes that, although he can't fight as well with only one eye, luck really works better when you can't see anyways. Unknown to Mat, Oliver opens Varen's letter and shows it to Talmanes. They're horrified to see that Varen's letter contained a warning that the Waygate in Camelot is not closed and it's not guarded, and a large force of Trollocs is going to attack the city. She gave Mat the letter expecting that he would open it quickly, not expecting him to show such restraint. Talmanes looks towards Camelot and sees that it's burning. The Black Tower. Time continues to warp the Black Tower, and there are very few followers of Loghain left to oppose him. It hasn't been revealed for certain, but it sure seems as though he's using Madral to turn people to the shadow, as both the Aes Sedai and Loghain's followers find that their friends seem different, as though they're filled with the shadow behind their eyes. Andral, a supporter of Loghain, tries to keep the remaining holdouts safe. He goes to Bavara asking for an alliance, and having seen that the other Aes Sedai are being turned, Bavara accepts. None of them can escape as the walls are watched and the second dream spike is preventing travel. Grady notices this and tells Perrin, who plans to look into it. The Shanshan. Fortuona considers the attack on the White Tower to have gone extremely well. Elaida, now Sufa, the Damane, teaches the Shanshan traveling, which Fortuona intends to use to reconquer the Shanshan Empire, which is fractured across the ocean. But first, she intends to make a second, more committed attack on the White Tower with the goal of leashing every remaining Marath Damane. Alright, we're done with the summary, and now we can get into the analysis. So if you skipped ahead, you're in the right place. If you've been watching with me, I'm definitely actually going to grab another soda here, because, yeah, it's going to be a long one. So, our theme this time around is trope, as in a common motif or cliché. Starting right from the beginning, in the eye of the world, the Wheel of Time has always had one foot firmly planted in well-established tropes, but held the other slightly askew. This changing, remixing, and deconstructing of themes across the borders of time, space, and gender is, in itself, one of the primary motifs of the entire series. That this is built into the world itself through the pattern and the wheel sets the Wheel of Time apart from most pastiche and deconstruction. We're not merely meant to accept the references for what they are, breaking the fourth wall by forcing us as readers to ignore the implausibility of IRL references showing up among characters who aren't aware of them. Instead, we're meant to consider how even our own familiar references have been altered across the borders that separate us from other versions of these concepts. Mat is a reference to Odin, but he's not Odin. Yet, Mat has more in common with old stories of Odin than, say, Marvel's interpretation of the character. Mat is probably more like Odin than the modern popular image of Odin. With that in mind, is it even correct to say that Mat isn't Odin? Or perhaps we shouldn't be asking whether Mat is Odin, but rather, will the legends of Mat within the world of the Wheel of Time be the same legends we have of Odin? Mat did not hang from a tree for 9 days, as Odin did, but there are rumors of Mat doing this. Just as the legends of Mat have more in common with our legends of Odin than they do with Mat, perhaps the real inspirations for our concept of Odin have more in common with Mat than they do with our legends about Odin. An age yet to come, an age on past. This relationship goes in both directions, and we are, in fact, living in a single moment in the very real pattern of cultures that's spun out, weaving together tropes from the past into new tropes for the future. You can't just look Odin up and find the original inspiration for him. Neither can you predict how the character will continue to change in the future. Perhaps over the next 3,000 years, the name and the history for the character will be lost, but people may still tell stories of a wanderer with uncommon luck, who never loses a fight or a wager. Perhaps he'll step into death's domain to challenge him and have his own death foretold to him. There are neither beginnings nor endings to this process. In the Wheel of Time, the most pervasive altering of trope is probably the reversal of gender roles. The Yang Flame of Tar Valon and the Yin Dragon's Fain are opposite from what we would expect. Throughout the world of the Wheel of Time, we repeatedly see women in dominant positions of authority in societies where men are subordinate to women. This isn't presented as a futuristic world, one where the biological realities of sex have been reduced by technology into irrelevance. The Wheel of Time forces us to consider whether the biological realities of sex were ever as relevant as we assume. Why should we correlate men with the sun rather than women? Amaterasu has been asking this question since at least 712 CE. My point is, the Wheel of Time is filled with tropes and references, presented both sincerely and critically. Robert Jordan didn't just mess with his inspirations arbitrarily for the sake of being different. He did so intentionally, deconstructing notions of gender, class, or even just our long-held assumptions about concepts we tend to swallow uncritically. In Towers of Midnight, the tropes really get pushed to the next level. Let's just list a few of the most obvious ones. We have two damsels in distress, one of whom was suspended in a magic tower like in a fairy tale or The Legend of Zelda. They both marry their low-born saviors. We have a messiah with a halo who saw the way to the promised land from the top of a mountain but won't reach it himself. He also performs the miracle of feeding multitudes twice. We have two instances of an old man, in Hopper's case explicitly a mentor, sacrificing themselves heroically for the sake of young men. We have an instance of love at first sight between Elayne and Galad. Our blacksmith lord forges a mythical weapon. Multiple characters reveal their secret identities. Odin finally loses an eye. A character who died off-screen last time turns out to have miraculously survived. I'll get into some of the specifics of these in just a moment, as I think a couple of these are worth really digging into, but I'm bringing these all up now to demonstrate that the Towers of Midnight is not only filled with cliches, but compared to the rest of the series, some of them are presented relatively straightforward, with very little variation. As we near the end of the series and the end of an age, things are coming more and more into focus. As our characters complete their arcs, they grow to become less conflicted and more pure, more mythical, more like the heroic ideals we're familiar with. This series could have just started off like this. This could have been a simple story about a collection of heroes fighting a simple battle of good versus evil. Why bother showing more than one gender or class when it's easier to just have wealthy men? Why show your larger-than-life heroes to have been fairly average kids? Ancient Egyptian artwork habitually omitted even the drivers of chariots, giving the impression of a single elite warrior somehow driving a chariot while also firing a bow. This isn't just true for ancient stories, it's still true today. To be clear, there's nothing necessarily wrong with presenting a simple, stylized story. Pallet Town from the first generation of Pokemon games was literally just 3 buildings, but I'll always remember it as a full town. Small town, but a real one. The important people in Warhammer 40k and Warcraft are literally larger and longer lived than everyone else, to the extent that an individual person, a normal person, is completely meaningless in comparison. I don't always want to consider how many people will die in the year after a battle is fought because their food stockpiles were taken by soldiers. Sometimes I just want to relish in the glory of that battle. Even in the Wheel of Time, there's a notable lack of, for example, religious diversity. There are differences in culture, even the culture of worship, but every person we've met so far believes in a single creator and a single great antagonist. The most serious oath anywhere is on the light and on one's hope of rebirth. There's nothing wrong with this. Polytheism and rival religions just weren't part of the story Robert Jordan wanted to tell. In fact, this simplification serves to bring the White Cloaks, for example, into greater focus. They don't hate the Aes Sedai because they have a different religion, but a different interpretation of the same religion. We could argue that this is only sensible given the more concrete touch of the creator and Shaitan have on this world, or that it has something to do with the schisms within Christianity, but sometimes it's just as simple as this. Details are good unless they're unnecessary for the point you're trying to make, and most details are unnecessary. This extends to pretty much any form of artistic expression. I love my busy, cluttered new office, but the austere, larger-than-life interior of a cathedral is vastly more awe-inspiring. A full choir can do a lot more than an individual, but REA solos can be far more emotionally moving. In the Wheel of Time specifically, there's also been a continual theme of disharmony in the world, with imbalance resulting in chaos and hardship. As the forces of good align against Shaitan, it's only natural that our protagonists resolve their internal conflicts, becoming pure, mythological figures in harmony with the archetypes they're stepping into. The great thing about the Wheel of Time is that the complexity and depth is still there in each character's journey, but they still end up in the position of archetypal heroes. Rand actually sort of explains this early in the book when he reassures Min that he's still the same man she fell in love with. I feel more like myself now than I have in months. I feel more like myself than I ever did as Lews Therin. Here, Rand is awakened to the reality of reincarnation as a continual journey for the soul. He's the person he is today because of everything that's happened to him in both this life and all the others that came before. His life as Lews Therin is no more important than his upbringing in the Two Rivers. Even his regrets, his mistakes, have shaped him into the mythical figure he is now. We still see the wrathful, hard as steel, violently passionate man when he defends Maradon, but we also see the sweet, confused boy who carried a delirious Tam to safety, anxious that his father might not really be his father, when he cries in Tam's arms, standing a step below him, in public view. Seeing this, I think we're meant to consider that all of our heroes and ideals are like this. You can strip away the complexity without losing the symbol, but you can't realize this mythological ideal in a specific character without understanding the journey that forged them. The past is the present and the future, even if our senses are limited to only the latest snapshot. We're not wolves after all. So of course we're going to see more cliché as the series comes to an end. The path we took to get here is more important than the final destination we're approaching. It's what gives the ending meaning. Tension in art is only truly realized when it resolves, and that's what we're starting to see in Towers of Midnight. So, alright, the first trope I want to discuss is the one that I felt was kind of the greatest departure from the rest of the series, our damsels in distress. Frankly, when I first read the scene with Morghese and Talonvor in chapter 21, An Open Gate, I really did not know what to think about it. It's probably the most melodramatic, cliched scene in the entire series. It's not just what happens, but the wording. She doesn't just find a pool, she finds a pool near a cleft with tall rocks clustered around it like an ancient broken throne built for a giant 15 spans tall. In her wistful reflection, near a pool of water, a literal reflective surface, Morghese is projecting her own feelings of having broken her kingdom and falling from her own throne by seeing a giant's broken throne in the rocks and dirt she walks past. Was there anything more hateful than being made the pawn of another, of being forced to dance upon their strings like a wooden puppet? She goes on to list the ways she's been manipulated throughout her life. Again, the language is overly descriptive and poetic. Footsteps on fallen twigs announced a visitor. The light from above dimmed, the thinner clouds moving on. The shafts of light faded and the minnows scattered. The footsteps stopped beside her stone. Then Talonvor speaks, announcing that he's leaving to fight in the last battle. It's really over the top. The circumstances here stretch belief even. I mean, in the exact moment when Morghese is despairing over how she's been used and manipulated, Talonvor finds her, jealous that even now Morghese has stronger feelings for Gabriel than for him. They explain their feelings openly, so openly that this feels kind of like a scene from a play. Again, their emotions are so great that they spill into the scenery and visual metaphor. You have made it amply clear that my attentions are not wanted. A queen and a simple guardsman. Pure foolishness. A queen no longer, she said. Not in name, Morghese, just in mind. A leaf fell from above and struck the pool. With a lobed margin and verdant richness, it should have had a long life yet. I think this scene is meant to feel jarring. Recall that this bit is in the same chapter immediately following the scene where Ituralde makes ready for his last stand and is narrowly, unexpectedly saved by Bashir's reinforcements. It reminds me of the transition way back in The Great Hunt, from the horror of Rand using the portal stones to the girls sitting around in the White Tower just kind of talking about boys. Morghese and Talonvor's drama feels self-indulgent when paired directly with Ituralde's bloody, miserable stand against the shadow. Yet, that juxtaposition also prepares us for the drama and heightens it. My heart is a traitor. Perhaps some Trolloc will do me a favor and rip it free of my chest. Isn't a line well served by looking at it coldly like we are here? It's much better to come across that still high from the adrenaline of Ituralde hearing the sound of boots outside his door, ready to jump out and meet his end, and then realizing that Trollocs don't wear boots. So there's also another angle here. Bear in mind that when she talks about being used by people like Taringal and the others who presume to be the real power behind the throne, she's talking about how she outmaneuvered all the houses in Andor to win the throne of a wealthy, powerful country and become perhaps the most powerful and respected queen on her continent, or at least of what we've seen of it. That doesn't mean that she wasn't used or that she didn't hate the concessions she had to make. Emotions don't care that most people would still be very envious of her position, but it does put things a little bit in perspective. As both Tom and Bryn have mentioned, Morghese, like her children, deals more in passion and intuition than on calm reason. She's had a real rough year and she's fallen a long way, so she's dwelling on how she's been used. But I don't think it's just being used that she's upset by. It would be one thing if she mentioned only the people who have raped and manipulated her, but she even thinks of Tom and Bryn. saying that Tom only saw her as a beauty to be hunted and romanced, and Gareth only saw her as a queen to be served. None of them made me their entire life, their heart. I think Tom and Gareth loved me, but as something to be held and cared for, them released. That's not an example of Morgase being used. If anything, it seems like she was the one using Tom and Brienne, or they were using each other. Brienne is one of the greatest generals in the known world, and he was fiercely loyal to her. Tom is one of the best spies and political manipulators that, anywhere, and she had him chased out of the kingdom. Note that Tom could have taken what he knew of her and sold it to one of her rivals, but it sure doesn't seem like he did. Same for Brienne. Lumping Tom and Brienne into the same category as Valda and Gabriel is really telling here. When Morgase talks about how hateful it is to be used, I don't think she's only talking about how she's been used, but about the transactional nature of all her relationships. Use and be used. Like what she's doing to Talonvor. Talonvor's frustration is key here. Let's step back from Morgase a bit and really consider Talonvor's perspective, and try to keep an open mind, as, again, emotions aren't concerned with what's fair or reasonable, and Talonvor definitely comes off, at least in my opinion, as kind of juvenile here. Plus, opening our minds up a little bit now will help us kind of stretch out before I talk about how important Gawyn is to the Towers of Midnight in 30 minutes or something like that. So Talonvor really wanted to save Morgase. He would have wanted to save her even if she'd never been in any danger. It's the fantasy of courtly love. Morgase was a queen and Talonvor was just a guard. He wasn't even a knight. The only reason someone like Morgase would ever even learn his name would be a display of royal virtue and grace, as when Elayne tries to build connections with her lessers. It's like a president shaking hands or kissing babies. It's just a spectacle at best. Granted, Andor doesn't have a taboo against the queen having relationships with lowborn men, so it was never strictly impossible, but still, how would a lowly guard ever catch her attention? Tom won Morgase's affection for a while, but Tom's not a simple guard. But then Morgase actually was in danger, and she lost the loyalty of her supporters. That was Talonvor's chance. It wasn't just a fantasy anymore. But then reality hit again. He couldn't do anything about Gabriel. He couldn't do anything about Niall or Valda or Asanawa or even the Shido. Talonvor certainly helped. Morgase couldn't have made it this far without him. But in each case, Talonvor wasn't the hero. The hero didn't care about Morgase at all. Rand killed Robin, and the Shanshan freed her from Valda, and Perrin saved her from the Shido. Galad at least put Valda to justice, but that doesn't really do Talonvor any good, does it? Rather than finding a way to lift himself up to Morgase's level, Talonvor just had to watch while Morgase was used up, raped, and reduced to a clumsy servant relying on the charity of lesser nobility. In his fantasies, I'm sure Talonvor has saved Morgase 1,000 times, heroically confronting Robin, dueling Valda, and leading Perrin's armies against the Shido at Malden. He wasn't just one of multiple people helping her escape, or a small piece in Perrin's great victory. From Talonvor's point of view, Morgase's fall is basically a cuckold story, with Talonvor forced to watch through all of it, helpless. And here he finds her, still thinking of Gabriel. Do you know the worst part of this? Talonvor asks. It's the hope. The hope I let myself feel. Traveling with you, protecting you, I thought maybe you would see, maybe you would care, and forget about him. Him? Gabriel, Talonvor snapped. I can see that you still think of him, even after what he did to you. I leave my heart here, but you left yours in Caemlyn. From the corner of her eye, she could see him turn away. Whatever it is you saw in him, I don't have it. I'm only a simple, common idiot of a guardsman who can't say the right words. You fawned over Gabriel, and he all but ignored you. That's how love is. Bloody ashes. I've all but done the same thing with you. So there we have it. Gabriel used Morgase, and Morgase is using Talonvor. Yet Morgase is still consumed by thoughts of Gabriel and Talonvor of Morgase. Talonvor sees that love and devotion are worthless, nothing but hooks for others to manipulate you. Which is just what Morgase was despairing over a moment ago. Not just of being used, but of having her feelings unreciprocated, used purely as tools to manipulate her, and doing the same to others in turn. They're both unreasonably, obsessively passionate people with an overly idealized view of romance, and they're both frustrated at how foolish this makes them. Talonvor can't heroically ride in to save Morgase from a dragon. He isn't her equal in title or reputation, but when it comes to love, Talonvor is the only man Morgase has ever met who can actually return her passion with equal intensity. Later, in chapter 44, Talonvor apologized for having tried to leave. You know that I will always be here, Morgase. I promised it to you before, and I mean it. These days, I feel like a bite me in a world of eagles, but I have my sword and my heart, and both are yours, forever. Here, Morghese has someone who loves her so deeply that he'll stay with her even if his feelings go unreturned. Morghese knows how hateful it is to be used, but Talonvor will suffer it willingly. More than anything, Morghese wants to give it into her passions, even though she knows it's not the best political play. She should get married to help Elayne secure the loyalty of one of the factions Morghese offended, as Talonvor says. But Morghese has lived her whole life like that, sacrificing her passions for her career, and she hates it. Talonvor couldn't save her from the Forsaken, the White Cloaks, or the Shido, but he can save her from this passionless life she's made for herself, and she can save him from the same. Together, they can free themselves of using and being used and just be happy. Alright, so let's move on to our other damsel in distress, Moiraine. So, I talked about Morghese and Talonvor first because I think the romance was actually fairly complex. It both avoided and embraced cliché, depending on how you look at it. Moiraine and Tom actually adhere to the trope pretty closely. Moiraine is in trouble and needs saving. She cannot save herself. She's held, weakened and unconscious, in a magical tower full of monsters. Tom heroically saves her, carrying her to safety. After the rescue, she immediately proposes. He saved the girl, won her heart in short order. Of course, this interpretation ignores the character's history. Tom didn't win Moraine's heart by saving her, she was already interested in him, and he in her. We know this because they both told us? Which, alright, I'll admit, my first reaction was pretty much the same as Matt's. When they first met, Tom hated Aes Sedai categorically. Then they really didn't interact all that terribly much. Then in chapter 10 of Knife of Dreams, we suddenly have her referring to Tom as Dearest Tom. But Tom told us that we were just not paying attention, so let's see if he was right. So a quick pro tip here. I use Calibre as my ebook reader when I'm not using my Kindle, and it has a fantastic search function. It actually supports some like full powerful regexes, but it also just has a built-in nearby words tool, so you can just do something like say Tom Moiraine and then hit search, and it'll show you every single instance of the book you're reading where Tom and Moiraine were just like near each other in the text. It's really, really useful. It's how I do a lot of the research for stuff like this. A lot of times you can't just search for a phrase, but you can search for, like within 5 words. Regexes are even better, but it's already going to be a really long video. I'm not going into regexes here. So on multiple occasions, Tom mentions liking Moiraine. In chapter 25 of The Great Hunt, Tom is disappointed that Moiraine isn't with Rand, which surprises Rand. In chapter 31 of The Dragon Reborn, Tom mentions to Matt that Moiraine is a, quote, fine-looking woman, a fine woman, if she were not Aes Sedai. But Tom's got a vigorous appetite, so it's kind of easy to ignore that. Like, he might just say that about every beautiful woman, and there's a difference between thinking she's a fine-looking woman and thinking she's a fine woman, or a fine woman if she wasn't Aes Sedai. For Moraine's side, we really don't get much evidence of her actually liking Tom at all. She seems to annoy his knife tricks when Tom helps intimidate the ferryman at the Terran in Eye of the World, but that's about as far as it goes as far as overt references go. But if we're paying very close attention, we actually did have a couple of hints that they'd get married. In chapter 45 of The Eye of the World, Moiraine is almost certain that Tom isn't dead because of a vision from Min that she doesn't go into. Then, in chapter 6 of The Shadow Rising, when Egwene asks Moiraine if she's ever been in love, Moiraine responds, "I could wager I know the face of the man I will marry better than either of you knows that of your future husband." But, alright, so actually look at it, that's still not very much. In retrospect, we can probably say that Min had a viewing that Moiraine would marry Tom way back in The Eye of the World, and there are a couple little clues there, but unless I'm missing something, they're really only interesting in hindsight. I don't think you can really do anything with them until Dearest Tom shows up in the letter. Of course, anyone could have called that they would just wind up together way back early in the series, but I mean, given that Moiraine wasn't married to Lan, Tom was kind of the only other guy around that made any sense, so at some point, you're just randomly guessing there. On the other hand, that actually does kind of matter when there are so many Ta'veren around. Our characters have pretty much been pairing off as fast as they can. Normally, I'd find this really annoying, like a sitcom just pairing off characters arbitrarily to generate some cheap drama, but it's actually been well established that people just get married more often when Rand's around. If Rand can just spend a night in a city and incidentally cause a wave of marriages, why wouldn't his closest friends and allies start pairing off too? We might even speculate that Morghese and Talonvor are at least partially due to Perrin's presence. That Mat and Fortuna's marriage was orchestrated by Ta'veren warping in the pattern is hardly even worth saying. But let's not get hung up on whether there was enough build-up to Moiraine and Tom getting together. While we're at it, let's also not say too much more about the writing between Dearest Tom and Moiraine, or how different Moiraine seems in this scene, or how rushed it felt. Like, the chapter wasn't great, but let's try to work with the text for a minute rather than just picking it apart. So if you watched my video on New Spring, you already listened to a pretty long rant about Moiraine and Siuan's relationship there, as well as their sexuality. Fortunately for me, Moiraine and Tom getting together actually fits really well with my take that Moiraine is asexual demi-romantic. It still works even if she's bisexual, or even if her relationship with Siuan was just kind of a college phase, but bear with me for a minute here. So we've seen that Tom has a bit of a type. Sure, not every woman who catches his eye is beautiful, graceful, of noble birth, determined and strong, but both Morgase and Moiraine are. Tom will probably never fully forgive the Aes Sedai for his nephew, but in Moiraine, he saw someone with a mission she was willing to put her full self into, and it was a good mission at that. Tom initially joins up to protect the boys from Moiraine, but after a while he sees that Moiraine is protecting them too, and they can do it together. Tom likes passionate women, but if we compare Morgase with Moiraine, Moiraine has the passion, but she never lets it overrule her reason. You know, I don't know if we'll have time for it in A Memory of Light, but I kind of want to see Tom and Perrin just talk about their wives and their secrets. I think a lot of what Tom liked in Moiraine wasn't just her determination and beauty, but also her wit and intelligence. Tom might actually be better at Dace Damar than Moiraine, but either way it's damn close. Tom has a real appreciation for talent and grace. Frankly, he's kind of a snob sometimes. I'm not even sure if Morgase could keep up with him on that, but I bet Moiraine can. We've also seen that Moiraine has a bit of a type. Passionate spy masters. I don't think it's just a coincidence that Siuan managed the Blue's eyes and ears while Tom did pretty much the same for Morgase and then again for Rand. That was really the closest they came to flirting, their interactions while spying for Rand. We didn't get to really see a whole lot of that, just some references that they were both spying for Rand and occasionally ran into the other's schemes, but I could imagine the two of them passing sly glances or hidden messages while sneaking about Rand's connections. To Moiraine, I think this sort of thrilling, high-stakes covert contest is far more thrilling than a lewd glance or a rough embrace. Really, when you think about it, of course we barely saw Tom and Moiraine courting. Half the fun of it for them was having it go above everybody else's heads. If the flirting had been overt, it wouldn't have done anything for Moiraine at all, I don't think. And really, though Tom's definitely allosexual, I expect that he had more fun dancing about in the shadows with Moiraine than he ever had rolling about with a less subtle beauty. On top of that, Moiraine saw early on that she can rely on Tom, not just as a sword, but as an independent agent. I don't think Moiraine is capable of doing anything without considering the practical gain, and Tom really does offer her something, even as a warder, that even Lan couldn't. Tom doesn't know right from wrong just because of some code, and he isn't successful because of training drills. When Tom sees something that needs doing, he'll figure out how to do it on his own. Sometimes that means charging a withdrawal to let a couple of boys run to safety, and sometimes it means helping a couple of girls who think they're ready to take on the world because they can channel stay out of trouble. Basically, Tom's a lot like Moiraine. He can even sub in for her when she needs to be in two places at once, as, again, when she needs somebody to watch the girls while she's watching Rand. And that's pretty high praise in Moraine's eyes. So yeah, I'm still not sure that I think A Rabbit for Supper was a good chapter, but this relationship actually makes a lot of sense. That it takes a little thinking to work it out actually feels about right for Moiraine and Tom. Why would their romance be any simpler than anything else they do? Alright, so I had a lot to say about our damsels in distress, but the tropes that stood out to me the most in Towers of Midnight were actually the biblical references in Rand's story. Granted, much of Rand's story has been a reference to Jesus, Moses, and King Arthur. This is hardly new to us now, but again, this feels like an escalation in Towers of Midnight. The first chapter really emphasizes how much Rand has changed. I mean, he has a literal halo, or really, more accurately, an aureole, around him now, in contrast to the aura of darkness he had before. His mannerisms feel more calm, knowing, and aloof, more spiritual. But in addition to his appearance and mannerisms, I want to focus on what actually happened on Dragonmount. I mean, he literally climbed a mountain where he saw the path to victory over Shaitan. I'm going to go ahead and just call that the Promised Land. But he also knows that he will not reach it. Of course, the idea that Rand would lead his people into the next age, but he wouldn't make it himself, has been core to the prophecies around him since the start of the series. Not just the written prophecies, but also Min's vision of him on a funeral bier with 3 women standing over him. But here we add in him seeing the way forward from the top of a mountain, and it's clearly a reference to Deuteronomy 34, where Moses climbs Mount Nebo and the Lord shows him the Promised Land, but also explains that Moses will not go there. If that isn't enough, we also have multiple instances of Rand feeding the multitude. First, his presence causes the apple trees to bear fruit, telling Almond to gather them quickly. Later, at Bandar Aban, he tells the dockmaster that all the unopened bags are unspoiled. It's really the second example that felt like the most direct reference to Jesus feeding the thousands of people with just a few loaves of bread and some fish. I really like how unfazed Rand is by both of these miracles, which again feels like an intentional reference to how unfazed Jesus is when he does the same. When feeding the 5,000, except for John, the Gospels agree that Jesus' response to his disciples saying to send the crowd away so they can find food was to reply simply, "You give them something to eat." When they responded incredulously, he just told them to start organizing the distribution, and they found that there was easily enough food for everyone. It's not just this reference either, but just how sure Rand is about what he's doing. When a refugee recognizes him and Rand hears that he was a soldier, he immediately replies, "Excellent. We need you to restore the city, Captain. I need you to gather your soldiers." In the matter of mere moments, Rand transforms a mob of starving refugees overcome with despair into a team of hopeful disciples. The first refugee, Captain Durham, finds a razor and cleans himself up in short order and starts helping Rand by not only following orders, but then by giving them himself. When Rand goes to inspect the spoiled food, he doesn't let himself get dragged into an argument, and he doesn't make a big deal about it. When the people see that Rand found good food and ask what he did to fix it, he responds again simply, "Nothing. You merely opened the wrong sacks. The rest are all good." This attitude was really striking. The entirety of chapter 25, Return to Bandar Abam, felt mythical to me. Rand moves so quickly and confidently, but he's also not emotionless. He feels guilt for having caused this mess and just wants to put it right quickly. He even insists that no soldiers are brought in. Bandar Abam has suffered enough beneath the hands of outsiders. Today she will not know the hand of a conqueror. Min notes that when the people obey, it's not a form of compulsion, but hope returning to them. It's honestly just a really powerful, emotional chapter, particularly compared with the last time Rand was there, which was just as emotional, but in the exact opposite direction. But this is also the Wheel of Time, so this miracle doesn't go unexplained. With the apples, it's Rand's presence warding off Shaitan like some spell. In Tar Valon and Bandar Abam, it's still clearly Rand's presence that brings about the unspoiled food, but the magic is more in line with the pattern. It just so happens that the food that hadn't been checked is all fine, as though we're seeing the result of the observer effect. Food you can see is either good or bad, but food you haven't yet seen will apparently be as good as Rand's emotional state when you look. I really like the spin on this trope. So those are the two really big examples I want to talk about. I probably don't need to go into detail on some of the other tropes, like Hopper, Perrin's mentor, sacrificing himself is pretty straightforward, and Noel does sort of the same thing for Mat, though he wasn't really a mentor, so doesn't fit the trope quite as well. Same story for Elayne and Galad falling in love at first sight. Cliched, sure, but kind of obvious. I mean, they've both been described as being so beautiful that they should be worshipped, or that their mere presence is a cruel joke by the creator to shame everyone else, that they may as well pair off. But I do want to at least briefly touch on one other example that I just thought was neat. Perrin forging Ma Elayne, he used swords. On a whim, I checked TV tropes to see if this scene shows up, and it's literally the first example for literature of the forging scene trope listed. Well, technically, they first list the scene in The Dragon Reborn where he's helping out with the blacksmith shop, but then it has this one. This is just a fantastic scene. I really loved how we saw Perrin work through his personal issues while working on the hammer. It's already well established that Perrin thinks things through better when he's got something to do with his hands. The way his thoughts on the hammer came together just was perfect. The metaphor of understanding the pieces worked really well here too. Perrin couldn't find peace in himself until he understood himself as a husband, as a wolf, and as a leader. And he couldn't make the hammer until he understood the haft, the head, and the capping bracket. Though, okay, I do need to add that the actual design for this hammer doesn't make a lot of sense. A solid metal haft on a 4-foot-long hammer meant to be used in battle. I get that it's power wrought, but still, the other power wrought weapons we've seen haven't had such impractical designs. We also saw with Laman's sword that the hilt was separate from the blade, right? Why wouldn't the hammer's haft be made of wood? You can swap it out then. Like, it's not just that it's too heavy, it's that the weight isn't distributed correctly. Bear in mind that weapons are generally really light, just like a few pounds, with the distribution set very deliberately, but fine, it's a magic hammer, I'll let it go. Anyways, I also wanted to mention Ma Elayne because it reminded me strongly of the forging of Aegis Fain and the Crystal Shard by R.A. Salvatore. I mentioned the Drizzt books before, and I'm going to say it again now. They're really good books, and you should go read them. They definitely lack the nuanced depth of Robert Jordan's book, but they're just really good adventure books. I'll restrain myself from putting in any huge quotes here. This video is going to be long enough as it is, but it's a great chapter. Brunner Battlehammer is a dwarven king and an accomplished blacksmith. Like Perrin, the idea for this hammer comes to him in a dream. He works in a fervor to make the weapon throughout the night, which he imbues with magical properties. Special care is also taken to describe the intricate engravings he makes on it. It's a really cool scene, though Perrin's scene here I think is the better of the two, as it also interweaves his personal plot really well, whereas that element, in Bruner's case, he was making it for his adoptive son, so there's still something there, but it's a little bit less kind of intricately woven together than Perrin's scene here. All right, that's enough about tropes. Let's get into some other stuff. With the end in sight, I want to consider what's actually at stake here and what the outcome might be. This is my last chance to talk about this stuff before I learn what the end of the series actually entails. We first learned from Ba'alzamon in chapter 51 of The Eye of the World, if we believe him, that this contest between Shaitan and Rand, or Shaitan and the Creator, or the Dragon and the Betrayer of Hope, or Ellen Morin Tadronai and Lews Therin Telamon, has happened many times with many different outcomes. We've seen, through the portal stones in the Great Hunt, that there are reflections of the world where humanity is gone. We heard from Archer Hawkwing that he and Lews Therin have fought both side by side and face to face. We also had Herod Fell's half-mad ramblings about the wheel and the pattern. In chapter 18 of The Lord of Chaos, Feld tried to explain how ages fit on the wheel to Rand. He shows how, at one point on the circle, Shaitan's prison is whole. Then a hole is drilled in it. Then it's sealed up again. Then the seals weaken. But if you follow the circle all the way around, you eventually reach a point where the prison is whole again, and then a point where a hole is drilled into it. He speculates that maybe they bored into a patch last time, but it would be ridiculous to think that the creator made the prison with a patched hole in the first place. No, it was whole in the beginning, and I think it will be whole again when the Third Age comes once more. Any age where seals weaken must remember the Dark One eventually because they will have to face him and wall him up again. We know that things repeat, and that includes the confrontation with Shaitan. The last battle must just be the final battle against him in an age then, right? Unless the Dark One breaks free to break the Wheel of Time and remake the time and world in his own image. This realization is what drove Moradon once Ellen Morin into the Shadow. If Rand wins the last battle, it only means that the world has survived one more turning of the wheel. But if Shaitan wins, then the wheel is broken forever. As we discussed last time, that's kind of just how life works. Every day you wake up and you either survive or you don't. Like, if you survive, you get another day, but eventually you won't survive, and that's the end of it. That's just how it works. Even if we didn't grow old, even if death wasn't inevitable, but just an ever-present threat, this struggle still doesn't make life pointless. You might even argue that the struggle is what makes it so precious and exciting. An eternity of existence without any threat would be, well, it would be like being an immortal being locked up in a prison. Wouldn't you try to escape, even if it meant the possibility of death? Is Moradon envious of Shaitan's imprisonment? Or do he and Shaitan both simply crave an escape from life? Does Shaitan even care if he wins, or would anything, even death, be preferable to the prison, or the box as Rand would see it? Is Shaitan really such an alien perspective, or is he no different from the Golem, sent adrift in a void forever? What's really puzzling me here is the nature of his game. That's probably too subtle of a reference, but I'm going to leave it in anyways. But something seems off about this line of thinking. Why was it so important that Rand turned to the Shadow if he could also serve in death? As Ba'alzamon explains in The Eye of the World, he could have just sent more Trollocs to Emond's Field. He could have killed Rand many times throughout the series, but he never did. Then we have the Wolves' perspective. At Dragonmount, Perrin saw Rand consumed by Shadow until he found the light. The Wolves tried to convey what would have happened if Rand hadn't found that light. Nothing to the wolf meant a vacant den, all the pups taken by trappers, a night sky empty of stars, the moon fading, the smell of old blood, dry, stale, and flaked away. We know that Rand was considering just bathing the world in balefire. In the epilogue to Towers of Midnight, we get a snippet from the prophecies of the Shadow. The prophecy foretells Shaitan's victory. The Lord of the Evening will come and take everything from everyone and bring about darkness and destruction. But there's one particular line in here that seems a bit odd to me. Quote, once again, his glorious cloak shall smother the pattern of all things. And another line, there shall be none but him, and those who have turned their eyes to his majesty. If Moradon is right, then Shaitan aims to destroy everything and end the pattern. Then why would there be anyone left at all, even those who have turned their eyes to his majesty? If this is the end of the pattern, then how can it happen once again? Is this referring to before the pattern existed? Did the creator build the pattern and the wheel in what was originally a void of Shaitan? Or is this period of darkness cyclical? Does Shaitan destroy almost all the world once per turning the wheel, leaving only dark friends to repopulate and rebuild? Is the last battle nothing but a way of determining who survives to begin the next age? I mentioned before how the wheel seems to be heavily inspired by Hindu concepts of time, with each age corresponding to a yuga, roughly. It doesn't line up perfectly. There should be 4 yugas, and even the last and shortest of them should be much, much longer than 3,000 years. But the basic concept lines up pretty well. Each age is worse than the last as morals and wonder diminish. In the end of the fourth, last, and worst Yuga, prophecy foretells the 10th and final incarnation of Vishnu, Kalki, will come to end the world, wielding a flaming sword and usher in the first age once more. A very roughly similar concept shows up in a variety of religions, sometimes explicitly referring to the turning of the, bear with me here, Kala Chakra, or Wheel of Time. But I'm not even close to being an expert in Hinduism, Buddhism, Sikhi, or Jainism, so we're just going to keep it simple for today. Even this is just one example of the trope, but the idea of the world being destroyed and remade is pretty popular. Abrahamic religions generally hold that the Great Flood only happened once, but even the concept of a flood in particular is common well beyond these religions, often referencing a hero who represents life. Note how Rand isn't merely fighting for what is right, but for love, and he basically has 3 wives, with multiple children on the way. There's a definite fertility aspect to his character. As he's realized, he's not a weapon. Mat can represent the Aesir, but Rand has more in common with the Vanir. Though he also has a lot in common with Tyr, so whatever, we're going to get off topic there. And we don't really know a lot about Tyr's cults anyways, so it's kind of hard to make any definite comment on that. Anyways, is Shaitan going to destroy the wheel or just the world? Because those might not be the same thing at all. This brings us back to the end. What will happen if Rand wins the last battle? What happens if Shaitan wins? Why did Shaitan want to win by turning Rand rather than in battle? Why not just have Ba'alzamon kill him as a child? It really seems like there's a difference between Shaitan winning the last battle and Shaitan getting Rand to turn to his side willingly. Frankly, I really don't know for sure, but I get the feeling that Shaitan's ultimate victory is already impossible for him, at least in this revolution of the wheel. If Rand had turned to the shadow at the end of the Gathering Storm, I think the wheel may have been broken forever and the pattern destroyed. But I'm not sure that'll actually happen if Rand merely loses the last battle. My guess, with the limited information we have now, is that even Rand's failure at this point would simply result in the destruction of the world, followed by its rebirth. Do note, by the way, that we really don't know whether Rand's going to win or lose at this point. Min's visions are glimpses of the pattern, so they don't hold that the pattern is broken. Even limited use of balefire might affect them. Aviendha's visions from the glass pillars are probably at least this limited, if not even more so. I've also got to wonder what will be different in the next stage. If the Wheel of Time is meant to occur in the same universe as real life, then why can people channel in some ages but not others? Perhaps each cycle starts with an age without channeling, where humanity doesn't know about Shaitan or the One Power. What might be lost, if temporarily, in the confrontation with Shaitan? Or looking at another way, what might be gained? The ability to channel sounds wonderful, but it also seems to inevitably bring war and inequality, and eventually the bore. Then again, the invention of firearms might not be any better. We should also wonder whether the cycle will be broken in the opposite direction, not with the destruction of the pattern, but the destruction of Shaitan. We haven't heard Rand's thoughts on this since his awakening. Perhaps it was just bluster when he thought that there might be a way to destroy Shaitan forever. We've seen a lot of impossible things that were impossible even in the Age of Legends, become possible now. Perhaps the wheel won't be broken, but changed for the better. Or, and here I'm really starting to take shots in the dark, but what if the pattern has always had a great antagonist, but it's not always Shaitan? Fain thinks he might kill Shaitan after he kills Rand. As far as we've seen so far, Fain might actually be more powerful than Shaitan. We really don't know what Shaitan's power will be like unleashed. So far we've just seen Shadow Spawn, all invented by Aginor and Dark Friends. The only truly direct form of power we've seen from Shaitan is the Taint and the corrupting so-called true power. Perhaps Shaitan's power is only in corrupting and manipulating people. That would certainly make sense given the name and Shaitan's role in Islam. Well, Fain has corrupting powers too. The dagger alone is corrupting. Fain can raise armies of Trollocs under his control. He can seemingly kill anything with his dagger. With time, could Fain come to replace Shaitan? Or could Fain be the one to end Shaitan forever? Perhaps Rand can only continue the endless stalemate, but Fain can kill him or draw with nothing but a touch now. If Shaitan is freed and takes a form that Fain can slip his dagger into, what would happen? How close is the parallel between Gollum and Fain going to be? It sure seems like Fain still has a significant role to play. It'll be kind of disappointing if he's just like a mid-boss before we get to Shaitan, or if he just kind of shows up to kill Rand at the last minute. Alright, so I'm going to stop this reaching in a minute here, but one last one. What if this entire age is nothing but the trial necessary to force the awakening of one man, the divine completion of a single soul, the graduation of one person from the world not in sacrifice but apotheosis? Or none of this is even close. Maybe it won't be some crazy nonsense, but just what's been kind of foreshadowed. Rand will break the seals, and there will be a great battle between the light and the shadow. Shaitan will lose and be pushed back, weakened into the prison. Using Calendar, Rand and Nynaeve, and probably some other people, will fix Shaitan's prison, not merely patching it, but using both side R and side in to make it as it was in the beginning, truly sealing Shaitan away for this revolution of the wheel. The first stage will begin without fear of Shaitan. Rand will probably die in the process, and it'll probably be because of Fain. The first stage will begin without fear of Shaitan. Then, thousands of years later, some jerks will discover the prison again, bore into it, and the whole thing will happen all over again. Alright, I really need to finish this goddamn video so I can just actually go find out. I really can't express how hard it is not to just pick up the last book. Like, seriously, it took well over a week to finish this script. It took much longer than usual. I'm recording it now. It's taken all day to record it, and it's probably going to take me 2 or 3 days to edit it. I really need to figure out how to do this quicker because I really need to see that next book. But all right, let's move on to talking about some characters. And first up, I want to talk about Galad. I feel like I haven't really had many good opportunities to talk about Galad yet, which is a shame because he's actually a fascinating character. Literally one of the first things Gawyn says to Rand is that Galad always does the right thing, even when he should not. That was when Galad ran to fetch guards when Rand fell into the garden with Elayne and Gawyn. Elayne reiterated that point later when trying to hide from Galad, as she knew that he wouldn't listen to her situation and make a real decision. In Towers of Midnight, Morghese thinks to herself that she should have known that Galad would be attracted to the White Cloaks for their black and white view of the world, and she regrets that she didn't prepare him better by teaching him that the world is full of colors that don't always fit into any spectrum of morality. As a D&D player, it's easy to just dismiss Galad as a lawful stupid paladin, and that's not necessarily wrong, but I think it is a little bit too reductive. Throughout the series, I've generally been pretty harsh on the White Cloaks, and with good reason. It's easy to draw parallels between them and, say, injustice in America's criminal justice system, but that's working the metaphor in the wrong direction. They're not bad because they're like bad groups in real life. The Children of the Light also aren't bad merely because they're wrong or because they often find themselves opposite to our protagonists, as that could be incidental. No, the White Cloaks are bad because they're stupid cowards. They're so terrified of being victims or of feeling unsafe that they're not willing to take on the risk of trust. That's really the primary takeaway I think people should have for the White Cloaks. The ability to channel makes a person powerful, and it's possible that the power could be abused. The White Cloaks don't have this power, so it's evil. Never mind that the same is true of a sword or an army, they have those, so that's okay. Thinking for yourself is risky, as someone might disagree. Wearing a uniform means that no one can pick on you without picking on your group. We see this in how desperately they chase Perrin for killing 2 of them. If they let one cop killer escape, then they risk sending the message that fighting back might not always be punished. For all their bluster, the White Cloaks are terrified of a fair fight. We can look to the Dark Friends in their ranks, the man who called himself Bors, a phrase we haven't seen in a long time now, and Bayar, but note how easily these couple of bad apples spoil the whole bunch. We see the same thing with the Red Aja. If just a couple of bad people can lead the whole organization astray, then the organization wasn't all that good to begin with. It's not that every White Cloak is trying to be evil. They don't even realize what they're doing there. Their fear and want for power are hidden, even in themselves, behind codes of justice. As we saw with Bornhall, the desire for righteousness is real. The problem is that the White Cloak's methods aren't an effective means of achieving it. Killing Bayar to save a man he hates is a truly righteous thing that Bornhall did. It might be the most difficult and greatest thing he's ever done. But did anything the White Cloaks have to offer make that any easier for him? I have to wonder whether Bornhall would have been a great man if only he wasn't a White Cloak. But Galad is kind of unique. He had a rigid ethical code even before he joined the Children. That's basically all we knew about him for most of the series. Our first impression of him is as a tattletale and as the frustratingly good older step-sibling. He's inhumanly beautiful, he's noble-born, and he has powerful friends and family. He didn't need to join the White Cloaks to find a group who would accept and support him. He's also just ridiculously skilled in combat. He doesn't need an army to protect him. Yet, for all of Galad's power and perfection, he was unique. That can be a good thing, but it can also be very lonely, and it can make a person wonder whether they're doing the right thing. We can see, from Morghese's perspective, that she wanted Galad to feel as accepted as his step-siblings, but of course that isn't how it was for him. He must have always been the odd one out. I can't imagine that Galad had many real friends as a child or a young man, given his station and his beauty and everything else to come with that. He also likely didn't know anyone who understood his worldview or could relate to it at all. How different is his worldview from that of the royalty he grew up with? Morghese can think to herself how she failed to teach Galad that ethics aren't just black, white, and gray, but a spectrum of colors that defy explanation, but that's how she sees things. Galad's worldview is stunted for certain, but I have to wonder whether the worldviews of those Galad grew up with were perhaps a little bit self-servingly permissive. We've seen how harsh and selfish Elayne's judgment can be, and it seems to me that Morghese would find no problem with that. How much of Galad's worldview and personality were formed from a feeling of wrongness with the injustice that he saw around him and the selfishness of it? I'll get to Gawyn and Elayne in a bit, but for now, I can understand why someone growing up with siblings like those and seeing that their behavior is considered right and good might learn to overcompensate in the opposite direction. I think I can understand how wonderful the Children of the Light must have felt to Galad. They teach right and wrong and absolute without allowing wiggle room for themselves. The Lord Captain Commander is beholden to the same laws of the lowest initiate. That's not how things work in Caemlyn. Respect must be earned, not merely inherited, and it must be earned with good work and righteous behavior, not a pretty face. For everything bad I've said about the White Cloaks, don't forget that I'm also harsh on the Aes Sedai and the various monarchs. The children have some truly good characteristics. Sure, Valda was a monster, but Galad really was able to put him to justice. Tylan raped Mat and everyone just thought it was funny. Elayne could have people assassinated daily and no one would even dream of challenging her to a duel, unless she happened to kill the wrong person. Sure, Morghese was a queen, but I don't think that actually mattered when Galad challenged Valda. If his mother had just been a poor farmer's wife, I think he could have made the exact same claim. The White Cloaks don't live up to their code all the time, and their very organization has some inherent flaws, but to Galad, it must have felt like he finally found where he belonged. As we see when we finally get a look inside Galad's head, he is incredibly courageous. Not Elayne's suicidal certainty that she'll make it somehow, but a real courage to take risks no matter the cost. This is just overwhelmingly admirable to me. Honestly, it's how I'd like to think I lived my life. In my career, I often got in trouble for standing up and saying something I knew might get me fired. My friends sometimes just would say that I don't have a filter, but I'm surprised they couldn't see my hands shaking or wonder why immediately after doing something outrageous, just because I naively thought it was worth taking a risk to do what's right, I was so quick to propose getting a drink or two. Of course, arguing with senior management about contractor benefits or work-life balance for junior employees isn't really comparable to challenging a blade master to a trial beneath the light, but like I've said before, I try to relate to characters where I can, and that's where I can. The character growth we see for Galad in Towers of Midnight is just fantastic. The mere fact that he's willing to entertain the idea that his worldview might be wrong is just huge. How often do we see any of our other characters do that? Galad isn't just considering whether he's wrong about a specific question, he immediately sees that if he's wrong about Perrin, then he might be wrong about a lot more than that. He's still got some more to think about, but knowing how methodical and introspective Galad is, I expect that he'll find some good answers. As Lord Captain Commander, maybe he can spread them to the rest of the children. Really, that's a lesson in itself. No book of rules is a substitute for a wise leader. The children under Niall and Valda and Asunawa were evil, but the children under Galad might actually become a true force for good. So while we're at it, let's talk about Gawyn a little bit too. I mentioned last time that Gawyn is sort of a gender-bent Disney princess. He was raised for the sole purpose of assisting his sister's rule, and he trained as a warder taught to obey their Aes Sedai. He was never really taught to be a person or an individual, but a tool for a woman to use, unquestioningly. It's hardly a wonder that Gawyn doesn't really know how to make a decision for himself, or that he was basically just waiting for a woman to decide his life for him. This time, I want to focus more on what Gawyn's perspective adds to the series with relation to Rand. Sure, he has some character growth in deciding to support Egwene while still having his own perspective, neither a leader nor a slave, but that kind of spoke for itself. What I'm more interested in is his role as a jealous perspective for our Ta'veren characters. That's really a big part of Gawyn's character. He's jealous of Rand. He's got other flaws too, but this is the big one, and it's part of why he's so unlikable. But it's also a crucial perspective to have. I mean, think about it. Of course he's jealous of Rand. If anything, it's kind of strange that we don't meet more people who are jealous of Rand, Mat, and Perrin. We've seen how hard Rand's life is, but we're approaching Tarmon Gai'don. How many people are starving to death? How many have been eaten by Trollocs already? Rand, Mat, and Perrin have hardly missed a meal. More importantly, they matter. If Rand dies facing Shaitan, he'll die a hero, likely to be remembered for an age. In Chapter 1, Alman asks, "Light, you're him, aren't you? The one they're talking about." Rand's response is, "It is likely, men are often speaking of me." That's not just true in this age for Rand, it was true for Lews Therin as well. It's probably been true for Rand throughout the ages. This is a world with reincarnation, but Rand is seemingly always reborn as one of the greatest figures of the age. That's kind of bullshit, isn't it? I mean, the average person can't even hope to be reborn as an important figure in the future. Those important parts were already set aside. Of course, Gawyn can't see that, but he can see Rand's journey this age. When they first met, Gawyn was a relatively important person. Not the hero of the age, but he had a lot of potential. And Rand was just some stupid lost shepherd. Now everyone in the world is talking about Rand, and Gawyn's lucky to be the Amyrlin's warder. We might not enjoy seeing Gawyn's jealousy here, but it's perfectly natural. Really, if we don't feel any jealousy ourselves, it's probably just because we're self-inserting as the main characters. It's worth considering how we'd feel if we were just people in the story. Really, it's worth doing this historically as well. We wouldn't all be lords and knights. Most people throughout time have been unimportant to the great narratives we pass on. Gawyn's not even a common person. He's just a few steps down from Rand himself compared to most people. I mean, he's important enough to have his own section in this video. So it might not be pleasant, but I think it's important to see things through Gawyn's eyes, at least for a moment. Our main characters have their own challenges, but how many random nobodies have exploded into fire or vomited their guts out as beetles without remembering anything at all about them beyond that? Rand's not having a harder time than most of the world at this point, but he's the main character, so we care more. Gawyn never bale-fired a palace full of innocent people. Why is he so much less likable than Rand? Is he really any less decisive than Rand? Less kind or respectful or patient? Was his romance any less frustrating than Rand's multiple romances? It's worth considering. Oh, and on the topic of Gawyn, I do want to just real quick point out that his response to Egwene when he comes back to her is that he had to learn how to surrender to come back. I thought this was a really interesting choice of words, given that learning to surrender is also how one learns to embrace Saidar. It seems fitting that the Amyrlin's warder would have to learn that lesson, and it also feels like a nice part of Egwene and Gawyn's romance, something for Egwene to kind of empathize with. Alright, so I really do want to wrap this up soon so I can get started on A Memory of Light, but if I'm going to talk about Galad and Gawyn, I should probably also mention Elayne. Egwene too, but let's take it one character at a time. So Towers of Midnight is a good reminder, in case we forgot, that Elayne really sucks. If I recall correctly, I named Elayne the most insufferable character after Egwene started her character growth, and that really hasn't changed much. When I say that Towers of Midnight is a good reminder of this, it's not so much because of anything Elayne did, it's that we can now see what all of our other characters act like when they're in positions of power. Everyone else has, at the very least, a moment where they realize that they're thinking of their friends only as tools to use, and they're disgusted by it. Rand had this realization first, but at this point I think all of our main characters have had this thought at least one point. Most of our characters were also hesitant to even step into the position of leadership. Even Egwene, who was pretty entitled and arrogant from the start, wasn't sure she was ready to become the Amyrlin. Elayne never has a moment like this. When Mat shows up, she jumps immediately to scheming about how to best utilize him for her aims, and she does not have even a moment's thought of like, oh, this is kind of weird. She even considers just stealing his Foxhead amulet. She ultimately doesn't, but even this seems less because she's got a conscience and more that she's trying to affect some sort of morality to impress Brigida and Aviendha. She very nearly loses it in her blundering with the Black Aja, never considering that, without it, Mat's dead. When Mat brings the designs for the dragons, she immediately seizes on them as a tool to expand Andor's power and borders. She even tries to press Mat into a contractual agreement which could be used to send the band against the Two Rivers if necessary. None of our other characters would even consider something like this. Now, we could say that this is only natural, given that she's the queen, but again, our other characters aren't doing this. Rand and Egwene have both proven entirely willing to change the status quo for the better, even if it means relying on a bit more trust. Egwene still aims for tower supremacy over women who can channel, but she's willing to change things, even giving up some of her own power, if it means forming an alliance with other women who can channel and ending some of the sources of strife and infighting within the tower. Perrin isn't even willing to force political marriages in the Two Rivers. Which, yeah, speaking of Perrin, Elayne comes pretty close to just having him executed. As I mentioned in the summary, I'm also suspicious that the wording of their agreement might mean that her children by Rand can take stewardship of the Two Rivers back from Perrin. Again, as a queen, she's in her rights to do this, but all of her other characters are seeing that at the end of the age, with the last battle on the horizon and Shaitan's touch visible on the world, it's time for some bad traditions to end. Even Aviendha is learning some of this for the Aiel out in Rhuidean. Meanwhile, Elayne is mostly focused on seizing as much as she can for herself. She wants the kin to serve Andor, the dragons, the band, and Rand. She wants the Two Rivers back. When considering Cairhien, she thinks to herself, that throne would be mine. She's just ridiculously greedy. It's not hard to understand why, of course. Elayne was raised the daughter heir under Morghese. Morghese is proud of Elayne for being this way. She's acting like royalty should, but when she's paired up against her other characters, it really demonstrates just how terrible she is, even if it is just due to her upbringing. Rand's been pretty busy, but he's still found time to expand peasant rights and feed the poor, and he didn't worry about borders or personal power along the way. Perrin was hesitant to become a leader at all. Again, even Egwene is giving up a little bit of her power for the greater good. In a lot of cases, these aren't quite the same, because again, like, Rand doesn't see himself going on to continue ruling the kingdom, so it would be less of a sacrifice to help out a foreign kingdom. He just wants to unify everyone for the last battle, but nonetheless. Anyways, speaking of Egwene, let's talk about her for just a quick moment. The last couple of books have been fantastic for Egwene. I've already talked about her at length in the last couple of videos, so I won't repeat that here, but Towers of Midnight was a good reminder that although Egwene has found herself in a perfect position, she actually hasn't grown so much as she just kind of found her niche. Egwene is really, really good at being the main character, and she's not very good at being anything else. I mean, I'm not saying that she should just let Rand destroy the seals without any question at all. Her full title is literally Watcher of the Seals, the Flame of Tar Valon, the Amyrlin Seat. It's literally part of her job to care about these seals, right? But she's just so damn condescending and certain about it. In chapter 56, she tells Gawyn he knows he shouldn't break those seals. A part of him does, at least. Perhaps that's why he told me, so I could gather resistance, so I could talk him out of it. A moment later, she thinks to herself, she didn't want to think of what would happen if he forced her hand. I'm really trying to see this from her perspective. She has some good reasons to think that Rand is mad. But she hasn't been thinking about this stuff at all. She's been focused on her training and on Aes Sedai politics. She doesn't know if Rand is mad. She hasn't interacted with him since before he really was showing any real signs of it. Min, on the other hand, has been focusing almost all of her attention on studying things like this, and Rand's been spending each moment he can spare helping. Egwene doesn't know the details, but she has to be at least vaguely aware that Rand has been thinking about stuff like this while she has been looking into Aes Sedai politics and training with the Wise Ones. Yet, she's immediately certain that Rand is wrong, and she's right based entirely on her thinking that, well, she's always right, particularly when the other party is a man. Which, speaking of her misandry, her stance on Gawyn is a little suspect as well. Quote, Gawyn nodded, no further complaint or argument. It was a wonder how he'd changed. He was as intense as ever, yet less abrasive. Ever since that night with the assassins, he had started doing as she asked, not as a servant, as a partner dedicated to seeing her will done. It was a wonderful thing. I mean, he consented to it, and they both seemed fine with it, but that's a servant. A partner who always obeys and is solely dedicated to seeing your will done isn't a partner, it's a servant. That's basically what the word servant means. Gawyn can be a servant if he wants, and Egwene can have one if she wants. That's fine, but let's not pretend it's something else. Egwene was definitely what the White Tower needed, but I'm not at all confident that she'll continue to be a positive force after the last battle. How are relations between the White and the Black Towers going to go? I wonder how many more concessions Egwene is going to make to the Red Ajah for the goal of tower unity. Okay, so I don't want to end the discussion on characters on a low note, so let's talk about Nynaeve. Nynaeve's character growth here has been a real slow burn throughout the series. That's not to say that it hasn't been happening, just that unlike most of her other characters, she doesn't ever really get like one book where she grows a bunch and then nothing for a while and then a whole bunch more. It's kind of always present in the background. Her growth started early when she started trying to learn to give up control and be more understanding. She's one of very few Aes Sedai who actually see the Asha'man as people, which is in itself astounding growth given her low opinion of men in general when we first met her. In Towers of Midnight, we got to see some more from Nynaeve, and I really liked it. First, Rand gives her some advice, not to let the Aes Sedai ruin her, and she seems to actually consider it. Then in itself, could Nynaeve have taken basically any advice from Rand back in the first few books, particularly about something so intimate? Then she goes on to accept being chastised by Egwene, not simply by being forced or shamed into it, but by practicing some real empathy, something that Nynaeve has historically struggled with. She's always been full of sympathy, wanting to help those in need, but now she's learning empathy, how to imagine herself in someone else's position. She sees that Egwene's position is similar to her own when she was made wisdom too young, and she decides to give Egwene the support she wishes she had received. That's amazing. Finally, she takes her test, and just as Rand advised, she doesn't let them ruin her. In the trial, she decides that letting people suffer and die for selfish gain, to become Aes Sedai, isn't worth it. One should not demand calmness for the mere sake of calmness, and a prohibition on running when there are people you need to save is foolish. I actually think that Nynaeve is, in a small way, kind of an opposite to Galad, kind of approaching the same point from a different direction. Nynaeve has always made her own rules, and she had to learn to balance her own judgment against the judgments, expectations, and rules of others. Galad always relied on ethical codes, and he had to learn to balance codes with a sense of personal judgment. But whereas Galad is just starting to look for this balance, it seems as though Nynaeve has kind of found hers. She'll call Egwene mother and she'll try to obey, but if someone needs her help, she's going to help, even if she has to hustle a little bit. There's also a little bit of a parallel here with Gawyn as well. Gawyn had to learn who he was without Egwene, then fit her into it. Whereas Nynaeve had to learn that channeling is an inherent part of her, but land is more important to her than her Great Serpent Ring. After her test, Nynaeve speaks with Egwene. I wonder if we sometimes put the White Tower as an institution before the people we serve. I wonder if we let it become a goal in itself instead of a means to help us achieve greater goals. Devotion is important, Nynaeve. The White Tower protects and guides the world. And yet, so many of us do it without families, without love, without passion beyond our own particular interests. So even when we try to guide the world, we separate ourselves from it. We risk arrogance, Egwene. We always assume we know best, but risk making ourselves unable to fathom the people we claim to serve. It's kind of telling here that Egwene's response is to look troubled and tell Nynaeve not to voice those ideas too much. I expressed some worry that Egwene would become a problem after the last battle, but maybe Nynaeve can actually help keep her on the right path. It's funny, Nynaeve started the series off as Wisdom, but she didn't really seem to fit the title at all. After a long period of very slow growth, I think Nynaeve has gotten there. Egwene was what the tower needed in its schism, but Nynaeve might be what it needs for its future. She might be what the world needs at this point. Alright, so this is going on far too long. I initially wanted to have a long section to dig through Ituralde section slowly, but instead, I'm just going to hit the real high points. Basically, I love those sections. I imagine everybody did. In particular, I loved how Ituralde's expertise as a general was demonstrated. Sure, Ituralde has a couple of fancy stratagems, which are always popular in fiction, but bear in mind that doing weird, unexpected, complicated things isn't really what makes someone a good general. A good trick really only works once or twice before everyone catches on, and if the trick works even when it's expected, then it stops being a trick and it just becomes standard practice. What we see in Towers of Midnight is how incredible Ituralde is at responding to changing circumstances. He holds the top of a hill, but the Trollocs launch Drakkar among corpses to chase them off the hill. If Ituralde was barely holding the top of the hill, then he's sure not going to hold the bottom, so he organizes a retreat. But he doesn't just sound a full unorganized retreat, he falls back very intentionally, guarding the retreat with 2 ranks of pikes and archers and by holding back Asha'man to make a gap for the last ranks. Then some idiot charges forward, making a hole in the line. Internally, Ituralde is pissed and he knows this could be disaster, but outwardly he just rides in to close the gap. Then some dumb trumpeter sounds the retreat early. Again, Ituralde is pissed, but he does his best to hold things together even as everything falls to hell. At several points during the battle, Ituralde internally thinks that they're just totally screwed. Rand's late, if he'll ever even show, and even reinforcements might not be enough at this point. But he doesn't give up. That seems to be his definitive trait as a general. He just doesn't stop, even when he knows they're doomed. So far, every time he's done this, something has happened to bail him and the surviving men out at the last moment. Ituralde didn't know that would happen, but if he had given up earlier, then it wouldn't have mattered when it did come. He even starts burning the city. Now, normally defenders really don't like to do this, but this is Tarman Bloody Gaidon. The city is already mostly evacuated, and the Trollocs are probably going to trash it anyways. His block-by-block retreat through the city was just incredibly well told, thrilling, and again, it did an excellent job of demonstrating why he's considered a great general. Sure, he definitely likes a good ambush, but more importantly, he keeps a level head, keeps the men motivated, and just doesn't give up even when he's backed into a corner. Alright, with that, I think it's time to call it. I intended to talk a little bit more about the Tower of Genji and about the Wolf Dream, but honestly, I think those parts actually spoke for themselves really well. They were awesome, but, you know, cool, go reread them. They're awesome. I know this video took a little bit longer than usual to get out. Thanks for bearing with me on that. The move and renovations were a ton of work, but watching Radagast run around in our yard definitely makes it worth it. Maybe I'll add in a clip, maybe I won't, we'll find out. I plan on starting a Memory of Light right away as soon as I'm done editing and uploading this, so hopefully it won't take as much time for that one to come out, but it might, I don't know, we'll find out. I don't know if it's going to be as long as this video. Honestly, I hope to God it isn't, because I am completely exhausted after doing this, and I am not looking forward to the editing process, so you know, we'll see how much is to be said about A Memory of Light. A lot of the reason this one was so much longer is just that the summary was a lot more detailed. I was much more thorough. Honestly, part of me feels like it was too long, but I sent it out for some early feedback and everyone actually really liked it, particularly given that this book is a lot more complicated than some of the other ones. And I even, there were 1 or 2 spots where people said that I pointed out things they had completely missed, like dealing with some of the stuff with Perrin. So hopefully that was useful for people. Let me know if you like more thorough summaries like that, or if it was just way too long, and I'll cut that in the future. Also, continue to think about what you'd like me to cover next. I'm pretty sure that I'll do at least one more Wheel of Time video after covering the last book, once I can dig into some supplementary material without spoiling it for myself. But I do plan on moving on to something else eventually. My wife keeps telling me to read Mage Errant, while my brother is telling me to read The Chronicles of Thomas Covenant or Red Rising. I mean, if I just want to get more subs, I guess I should probably go into the Cosmere, but I'm kind of feeling like doing something different, like maybe some William Gibson, some Norse myths, maybe a video game or a couple of video essays not directly tied to any single work, such as a video on literary theory, which I mentioned before and there was a little bit of interest in. I'm really not sure what I'm going to do yet, so comments will definitely help me decide. Anyways, again, I'm tired and I want to get to the editing so I can get this out soon. It's Tuesday right now. I'm really hoping to get this out by Friday or Thursday, but we'll find out. But in any case, I hope everyone liked this video and, you know, please leave a comment, like, subscribe, all that crap. So, all right, see everybody next time.